There's no shortage of trauma that comes from constantly changing, constantly testing your edges, constantly putting your body through things that most people would never do. I just got to figure out, how does that translate into the civilian world? And what is your final mission? What is your final game? Well, it seems to me that the final mission, the final game is understanding what's happening inside. And that might be the scariest thing.
What up, fam? Welcome to another episode of Life Beyond the Game. I got a really special guest for y'all today. First, I want to say I'm super grateful for everybody that is coming to this show. It's continuing to grow, and the feedback has been amazing. As I set out on this journey to bring on athletes and other high achievers who have gone through challenging transitions and uncovering of deeper identities of self, it's been really cool. The intention is really so that we can share these stories, so that we can see ourselves in these stories and really be inspired to go on our own journey of deeper healing and self-discovery. It's what I'm really passionate about. And so Jessica Depatie, our guest today, she reached out to me, and she's producing a documentary that is about a very aligned topic with what we talk about on this podcast. But it's from a really cool lens and angle. And she's an incredible human, and our conversation covers a lot of ground. She opens up and shares vulnerably her own stories and her own uncovering of her unconscious patternings and her own shadow that I think is going to be really powerful to hear and to witness. But she's also launching this campaign to really produce a high quality documentary, and it's around post-traumatic growth. And this concept of post-traumatic growth I really love, because a lot of the things we hear about is post-traumatic stress. And as we talk about in this episode, post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth are the same thing. But in reality, it's really how the lens in which you view the things that happen to you. And this documentary is really powerful. She brings in a lot of thought leaders talking about this concept of post-traumatic growth and why, really holding the question of why some people grow, change, shift, evolve through traumatic experiences, and some people don't. And I think it's a really, really important topic for the world and the environment that we live in. We are all going through, feels like deep expansion. I know in my life, I'm expanding all the time. I'm going through, it's like a roller coaster ride. I have a lot of highs and a lot of valleys. And the beautiful thing about this life is you can't know what the highs are without the lows. And you can't protect yourself from growing through challenging experiences, but developing the tools to be able to navigate life and learn and grow through life is really what the most successful and the most grounded and impactful people in my life, they've developed the tools to really navigate life in that way. So wherever you're at, I think, and whatever you've gone through, I think this episode is really going to be a powerful listen for you. They are currently, right now, I think the month of June is Mental Health Awareness Month. So they are actually raising money to get this documentary across the finish line. There will be some links in the show notes if you feel called to participate. They actually have a 30-minute trailer or a short version of the film that you can actually watch. It's really incredible. So there's a link. If you donate, I think a small amount of money, $15 or more, you get an opportunity to watch the 30-minute version. And if you feel called to support in a larger contribution, that would be hugely beneficial. And if simply want to support, by the best way you can probably do that is share this episode with anybody that comes to mind as you listen, anybody that you think will get something out of it. Share this episode far and wide so that we can help support Jessica and help support those who may be moving through a transition of their own in their own life, and inspire them to know that they're not alone. We're all in this together. And so without further ado, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. My good friend, incredible human, Jessica Depatie. Before we get started, I want to mention the Härt Collective. We are now closed on our applications, but we are still open for receiving people to put on the wait list for next year. It's been really incredible to see how well received the vision has been. We've had over 170 applications. We're sifting through those now to cultivate and find the most powerful group of 40 individuals, high-impact entrepreneurs, leaders, visionaries, who not only desire to be around other like-minded, like-hearted peers, but who also know the impact that a community can have for the greater good of all. And so the long-term vision of this community has always been leveraging the power of the network itself and the energy and the resources so that we can come together and have really deep discussions on how we can impact the world. But first, this year is about building that nucleus through the initiation process out on the river. We're going to be doing some whitewater rafting, some deep, authentic relating and connection skills. And if you feel called and you really think you want to be a part of this thing, and you put in an application for the wait list, if I see it come through and it's very calling to me, then I might reach out and get you one of these spots in the upcoming retreats. Got one end of June, end of August. And I love you all so much. This vision has been really cool to see how this podcast is growing, how the Härt Collective is growing, and all the things that are on my heart that I feel called to bring to the world would not be possible without all of you. I feel like we're just getting started. I know we're just getting started. I hope you feel the same way. Really grateful you're here. Another way to support this podcast, leave a 5-star review, follow it, subscribe wherever you're watching, listening. Putting a lot into this. I love you all so much. And just take a few minutes to support the show by saying a few nice words on those little review things. That goes a long way. Leave a comment or subscribe on YouTube if you're watching it there. And I would love to hear from you. Reach out to me on Instagram. Follow my newsletter. There's a link in the show notes. That's probably the best way to stay in touch with what I'm doing. I put weekly kind of musings and kind of updates on what I'm moving through personally, as well as promoting the podcast. So you're not going to want to miss that. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. I love you all so much. Enjoy the episode.
Do you ever have like obsessive words go on in your head? I don't know, just like you keep repeating it, keep repeating it.
Like mantras, before you knew what mantras were?
Yeah, but less elevated, more like burger, burger, burger. Like,
is that what happens in your monkey mind?
Sometimes. So active, attractive, and in demand stuck with me. I would just like repeat it. And yeah, it's a mantra now. It's not burger level like elevation, but it's a thing.
It's powerful. Say it again.
I'm active, attractive, and in demand.
That's powerful, especially because we just did those breaths together. I'm like vibrating in my body.
And there's something funny about it too. I always laugh every time I say that. I'm looking at myself in the mirror because I think now what it is I'm almost a middle-aged woman and looking at myself saying it, it's just hilarious to me.
Oh, you don't look middle-aged.
I don't really know what middle-aged is. What is middle-aged?
I guess it's a relative concept.
I feel ageless.
It's amazing. I mean, I feel like I'm getting younger the more I'm taking care of myself and what I'm feeling in my body and the belief around that. I mean, I think it's, what's his name? The School of Greatness, Lewis Howes. Mm-hmm. He grew up in, I think Christian Science is what it's called. But he has a story around, like when he was young, his parents didn't celebrate his birthday. And it seems kind of cruel when you think about it, like, oh, it's fucked up. He's like coming to his parents like, well, my friends have cake and presents on their birthday. And he didn't have any of that. And their thought process was, we don't want you to get too attached to your age because it's only going to limit you. You're either going to have a story of you're too young to accomplish something, or when you get old, you're going to be like, I'm too old to accomplish something. And age is just a number. You can achieve anything you put your mind to in this moment. We don't want you to be limited by that. And when you hear that, you're like,
that's pretty sweet.
That's so powerful. But it's like, from the perception of the child, it's like, this is fucked up. But
totally.
the lessons that you really instill through that is super powerful. And there's so many stories like that in this paradigm that we live in that are they create subconsciously these limiting beliefs within us in comparison to the rest of the world of, I am too young. Like, what is middle age? Like, even they do studies now around the biological age of your cells. And there is, I truly believe, we're not even reaching not even close to the potential capacity of what we can achieve as humans as far as longevity, health, vitality, because of the frequency that we live in currently.
That's very interesting. On the topic of like agelessness.
Your words are your thing.
Well, I was born yesterday. I'm one. Just learning English. I also feel like I'm getting younger to an extent. Some days, most days, I'm like, I don't feel 35. And 35 is young too. I'm not saying like I'm an old lady or anything, but
just getting started.
I know, I'm feeling that. I feel that so much. And then I'm also, maybe this is part of what you and I were chatting about before we flicked on the mics, which is some of the experiences that we've gone through. What does getting better even mean? Right? Hey, let's just jump right into it. For me, getting better, feeling better about who I am is having this full expression of life, like feeling lots of things. And so the feeling of I'm melting and my soul is getting sucked out when I walk into a Walmart, I'm also here for that, because I have a sense of pride is the wrong word, but there's something around that I'm like, there's an amount of self-acknowledgement that I have in my body that when I walk into a space like this and I can't function super well, I'm okay with that. Like I'm kind of proud of myself.
Does that happen when you go to Walmart?
Oh my God.
Yeah. The frequency is a little bit stale and overwhelming. And
Walmart frequency. We should put those two words together and like make it a thing that'll get into Webster's dictionary at some point, because that's like a notable frequency. And no shade to Walmart. Many fantastic people work there and I go there sometimes, but there is something about the lights and the slave labor that a lot of that stuff has been born from, and just like the whole thing that put into one place. Girl, it's a vibe.
Yeah, it's a vibe that I don't want to be in very often. And I mean, it's just a part of the bigger systemic kind of paradigm, uber capitalism kind of story that we live in as a society and culture. And to go into it, I feel the same way. Like I go into Walmart less and less. And when I do for something that I need to get, I'm reminded of why I chose not to go in here anymore. But it's really convenient. You can find anything in there. And me and my partner Sarah, I just had her on a podcast, and we're really moving towards deeper levels of awareness in our own consumption and overconsumption, and really trying to consume less and not need as much. And it's really, really challenging, but it's really, really empowering. And realizing we just did this cleanse where we ate just organic fruits and vegetables for 30 days, no processed foods, no sugars, no meat products. And, I felt so clean and clear and didn't consume as much. I didn't need as much food. And it's just really got me thinking of like the deeper layers of freedom. And, we live in this culture, especially with this like spiritual renaissance and really people connecting with the deeper parts of themselves. And it's all really beautiful, but like, what is the actual thing we're after? This idea of this kind of new agey energy of abundance and, attracting wealth, and you're worthy of all this stuff. And, what I'm really connecting with now is like, what is real spirituality? It's on the very base foundational level. It's connecting with where your food comes from and living in reciprocity with nature. And there's, not many people doing that. And we're just starting on that journey. And it's really teaching me a lot about where we're at as a society and culture and how disconnected we are from our food, from nature, from ourselves. And it shows up in something like Walmart in a very visceral, felt way.
It's so tough. You go into a place like that and everything is packaged, right? I have a couple questions for you on your food journey also, but back when I lived in Canada, my partner and I lived on a little farm. I say farm, like it was a big ass garden, I would say farm, but we had lots of chickens, more chickens than we knew what to do with actually. And lots of rabbits. Chickens? There were 20, but 20 for two people that have never had chickens before. That's too many chickens.
Was just a lot of work to take care of them? Or?
You know what? Actually, they were easy. The chickens were effortless. The rabbits, that was a lot because they would dig. So we had their pen, I guess you could say, the area where they were in up against a berm. And so they were able to dig their own home, right? Which was really cute. And it went very far. Like we tried to send a little thing in there to see how far it went. And it was
they're like burrows?
Yeah,
wow.
Little burrows. And then new baby rabbits would pop out every single day. Just new rabbits. And so all of a sudden we have a lot of rabbits. We were raising them for meat. And we had a Belgian Malinois at the time, a dog. Looks like a German Shepherd. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And so we would feed him the rabbits. And so I guess more of the rabbits being hard to take care of was killing baby rabbits was like hard to do.
Dang.
Yeah, it was.
Why rabbits for food specifically?
Yeah,
why is that?
They breed very quickly and they're Yeah, that was basically it. And they're easy to take care of and they're cute.
But you eat them?
And you can eat them.
Wow. Yeah. How's the meat taste?
Great.
Really? How do you cook it? Do you like grill it? Do you bake it? Do you kind of do anything with it?
So rabbit meat can be tough. And so rabbit stew is often what you'll do. But because we had so much rabbit meat, we did everything with it. And in a pinch, just throwing it on the grill.
And what was this vision of having, like doing this? Was it more like self-sustainability, sovereignty, and like just kind of getting in that process?
Being from Los Angeles, I didn't know how disconnected from the earth I was until I moved to Canada. And I was like, wow, being outside is great. Not only is it great, it was filling a void that I didn't know was missing, this sense of connectedness. There's a sense of connectedness you can get in a city that you don't get living rurally, which I also experienced living out there for so long. That actual connection to people was sorely missing as well. But yeah, it was something that before we moved on to the island where our little farm was, I really got into the idea of permaculture. Like there was something about it that I really liked. I had no experience in it. So I just read a ton of books, listened to a lot of podcasts, and learned a lot about life in general based on permaculture, like how systems work together. And this was all a new concept for me, really. Luckily, kids these days are coming across this much earlier than I did, but I was a late bloomer. And so when I discovered my awakening moment, all these things flooded in. I went buck wild on trying to understand everything I possibly could about what was missing in myself and where that came from. And so yeah, once we move on to the island, I was like, I have all this information. I know that carrots are supposed to be planted with this thing and DDD and like collecting water and blah, blah, blah. Come to find in actual practice, there is a never-ending amount of systems knowledge that one needs to have. And me being somewhat dyslexic, the majority of what I could do was just put two plants that belong together next to each other.
I know you belong together.
Carrots love tomatoes. And that was basically it, But even still, like, even though I did row planting, seeing these things grow and then getting our rabbits and then finding a chicken mentor. Like I had a chicken mentor. He was an end of days guy. His name was Glenn Black. He still sends me text messages on like how the world's going to explode and preparing me for it, which I'm here for. Like I love people that have a thing. Like that is one of my things is I love people that have a thing. So I'm here for all the stories. But to find a mentor for the first time in my life that was much older than me, who I didn't know, who like barely liked me as a person, but cared so much about his craft that he wanted to pass it on to someone.
And his craft was chickens specifically? Or was like doomsday prepping kind of stuff?
Doomsday prepping, yes. Yeah. And
which is an interesting frequency.
And he was like, because you're not going to be saved. Because clearly.
Oh, is he like a Christian? Like
some kind of that. Yeah, I'm not exactly
like
sure.
End times Christian, like preparing for the apocalypse and the prophetic stuff from the Bible.
Yeah.
That's how my dad is, but he's not actually preparing for it. He's just bypassing everything.
Okay.
Which is intense.
I mean, they have their pros and their cons.
Totally. Like that's the person you're going to call when if shit hits the fan.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And on the island, everybody was like, Glenn Black is insane. And I'm like, yo, when shit goes down, which it could, you know, because this was right before COVID. No, this was right after it started. That's when we moved to the island.
Everybody's like, Glenn's Black, not so crazy now.
Not so crazy.
Who's your best friend? Glenn Black.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't even know if I answered your question, but yeah.
I don't even think I asked one.
Good. I have lots to say about chickens. Is that why we're talking today?
Chickens, yeah. I think chickens are amazing. Like they're like in theory the most sustainable food source you can do. They just pop out eggs every day.
When you said that, I was just thinking, yeah, chickens are the greatest. I've clearly had that thought before. But the fact that dinosaurs, like they kind of turn, I don't know the science about this, don't quote me on it, but like birds are a descendant of the dinosaur, right? And when the earth decided to squash all of that, the dinosaurs were an interesting design that maybe for this new earth didn't need to come along, right? They didn't need to come along for the ride, but the bird version of them did. And that's the chicken, a variation of that. So it makes sense, God or the universe or whatever smarter thing that exists outside of me was like, maybe not dinosaurs, but maybe this like small version of it.
It's not going to kill humans.
Right.
It can support humans in a very beautiful way, but they're not going to eat humans.
Yeah.
Which is good. And they taste good. And we're going to make everything a metaphor for it tastes like chicken. So there's something there as well.
Rabbit does actually taste like chicken.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Why doesn't a chicken taste like rabbit? Not as socially acceptable to eat rabbits, especially cute baby ones.
Oh my gosh, that was so hard. Yeah.
So hard.
So actually that relates to this next part of my story that related to your food experience for the last 30 days. So I went raw vegan after that because after killing a lot of animals, a lot of them, because then we moved off the island right after that. So everything had to go, it was a, what do they call that? A fire sale of animals. We ate all of them. They all were consumed. But slowly I started to realize how little I needed to eat because normally I would buy a chicken from the store. That'll last maybe 2 meals, maybe 3, like a breast for 2 people.
Yeah, like a rotisserie chicken.
Yeah, like you can eat a half a chicken in 1 meal. That's a dish that restaurants serve, half chicken, you know? But I realized I needed like a quarter of a breast and I was full and I wasn't sure, is this the quality of the meat that I'm having? They're eating all of our scraps. They're super happy chickens. Or is this my new awareness that I knew this animal and I'm not just going to mindlessly eat it? And I wasn't quite sure what it was. But either way, I had a really hard time buying meat from the grocery after that whole thing. Like I just felt a little bit nauseous. And I wasn't, with paleo forever. And I prepared myself to go through this rite of passage in a sense of processing all of these animals and taking them out of this planet, basically, and then consuming them. And it still was like, okay, there's more work for me to do here. So then I went raw vegan for like a year, which was almost 2 years ago now. And a similar thing happened where I don't know if it was good for me. Like often people ask, like, how did you feel? I felt clear and I felt like it was a reset. A whole relationship with food about being gluttonous and over consuming went out the window because the palatability of being raw vegan is just like not delicious. I don't care what you say. Raw vegan don't taste that good.
Because of the raw part specifically. Because vegan, if you're cooking the food, you can make some pretty beautiful dishes, but raw vegan. You did that for 2 years?
Just 1 year.
1 year. You're not currently doing that? No. How did you feel?
I felt good. I felt weak. I got very skinny. I also like my protein. So I didn't do any protein powders or anything. So my only protein sources were basically like mushrooms and broccoli. And I didn't do any legumes because I just don't digest them very well. So I think my protein count was like dismal. And then I had the religion of fitness nutrition ringing in my head, like, you're going to die. Like you're consuming no protein. And so there was part of that identity that I was also losing. Like, actually, I feel fine. I might not be very strong right now, but I feel really good. And then I got to a point where I wanted to start training again and I couldn't eat like that so much. So, but that thing stuck with me, that consumption. Oh my gosh, the words today.
Consumption.
Consumption. That will always be with me.
Yeah.
I know I don't need to eat as much as I used to.
And that's the biggest thing, right? I mean, that's what happened when I did this 30-day thing. Like I felt super clear. My system was allowing my digestion system and like my to reset, and I felt super clean. But there was a part of me that felt like I didn't have the power.
Yeah.
And like I felt really good, but it's just interesting to like even it's hard to explain like the power and the force of having like protein and like more solid frequency meals. But it really gets back to this point of intuitive eating and connecting to your body and the food that you're eating. And it's not about eating meat's bad, but eating meat from the store, that the way it's raised and all the frequency, like connecting with the frequency of food is such a powerful thing. And that's why, getting and growing our own food at our land is like, imagine like planting something, growing it, watering it, putting the compost from our own scraps and back into the soil and then loving on it and growing it. Like that food, that plant, that tree, has a relationship with us. And so it's going to provide us this nutrient-rich food where we won't need to eat as much. It's going to fuel us more. And just how void our actual food, even, realizing like organic food, like a lot of that even has a lot of the glyphosate and a lot of the toxins in it because just there's so much of that in the air. And I'm just like finding more and more out about this. And because the soil is so fucked up right now, it doesn't have the nutrient density that we really need and the frequency that we get from eating this life force to give us life force. And so going and eating a chicken at the store and going and eating chicken that you knew, that you raised, like the frequency of that, once you connect with that, it changes everything. And like I realize when I go shopping now, because I did this little reset, I'm not going to eat like that forever, but it's changed my entire awareness of my relationship with food. It's really fascinating.
It's so cool. Yeah, it's really neat also that scientists are just now discovering what we're even talking about, like how it works. Because we can talk about frequency and we can talk about energy and it feels true, right? Like it is true and I don't know how it works, but it is true for me. It's neat to hear from these scientists that are exploring like, eating things that are grown on your latitude provides you with the nutrients that you need to soak up the amount of vitamin C that comes from the sun that is like, where you live and things like that. Like that stuff is so, so cool.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, that's not my expertise, so don't ask me more questions on that. But I love a local food moment because there are things that we'll probably never understand in our lifetime. But the thing that we do know is that happy animals make happy people, happy plants grown close to you make happy people. More or less.
Yeah. It's not too hard to understand like frequency. Even like you go to emotions is just energy in motion. And when you're able to connect with your emotions, like gratitude has a frequency. It literally can shift your state of being. Anger has a frequency. Sadness and grief have a frequency. And so those frequencies radiate out through your being. Like if you're angry and we're in the same room, I can feel your anger. Mm-hmm. And so if you're, you think about like the chicken that is raised in like these pens with a bunch of other chickens and they're not really cared for and they're like in this scarcity mindset and they're like feeling scared and in a state of fear and then they're not really killed in the right proper way and then they're thrown on a truck and then all the people that are interacting with those pieces of food, like their frequencies going into it. So all of that whole process and it ends up on a shelf in a store and it's just sitting there. It's so as opposed to, I have a relationship with this. And like, if I'm in a state of gratitude and presence because I'm on my own land and I'm really feeling in a state of love and gratitude and I'm sharing that with the plants that I'm growing, like just thinking of how that affects. And there's plenty of science now where people growing plants and you just give an intention of love to it or an intention of fear and hate towards it. And they do these studies and literally the plant that's receiving love is like flourishing and the other one's like shriveling up and dying. That's fascinating.
Man, I can feel viscerally this like experience that you're talking about right now, like talking about the chicken that has the negative frequency in it. Believe me, I get how that sounds for somebody listening. Like, wow, she's like a chicken empath, But the thing is, like, what came up for me as you were saying that was, I have this theory that I don't think it's an uncommon theory that there actually are. I'm going to take a quick left turn here. Racism isn't actually a thing; it's experiencism. Like, once you have a friend from that group of people that you like have had a certain kind of a thought about, once you interact with them, once they're a part of your family or something, then it's like everything changes, right? You have a different experience of what it's like to meet in different culture that maybe you were born to dislike or to be mistrustful of. It's all about experience. And so my experience with chickens was a non-issue. Like it's a thing that I buy from the store. Like I would buy a box of pencils or something. A box of pencils. Like I don't buy boxes of pencils, but
who uses pencils anymore?
That was a weird
artists.
Example.
Yeah. Are you an artist, pencil artist?
No, I'm neither of those things. But it wasn't until I had my experience with these chickens that
they were part of your family.
Yeah, they were part of my family, and now I see the chicken at the store, and I have a whole thing about it. And so yeah, like. Now that you're connecting with the land in a different way, and now I think that more people are, which now I live in the city and I'm realizing how much I miss that. I thought I could hang living in my high rise, but...
Because there's a frequency of cities too. Oof. And you just think about, we just talked about the energy of humans, put millions of humans together in close quarters, not to mention the actual frequencies of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of the EMFs that go on with all of this, the energy that's going on anywhere. And then you put all those humans together. It's hard to find your own frequency and you get lost in that. And that's why there's so much talk about mental health. We're so disconnected from nature. When you live in a city, like it's almost a requirement that you need to go out outside the city just to reset and reconnect your frequency.
Yeah, it requires a sense of discipline. That's what I'm realizing. Something that I didn't need to discipline myself to do before. I can get stuck inside very easily. And so, yeah, that is something that I wish more for people is that you can just do one thing, commit to going outside and being in nature. Like, I understand how cliche that sounds, but if you're anything like me, I forget that a lot. Like, I need to schedule it in because I assimilate so quickly to wherever I'm at.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny how humans, we try to make things so complex, like this whole idea, like the mental health crisis, and we need to create all these pharmaceuticals, and even now the psychedelic renaissance, which is really beautiful, and using these psychedelic compounds to help with mental health and people talking about mental health, but we're not actually talking about the core root, and we're making it so complex. It's like, have we tried to create a program where people can get out and reconnect with nature and slow down? And it's, when you look at the simplicity of it, it's like, that can't be the problem or the issue. There's got to be some type of complex psychological thing. It's like, I'm telling you, it's because you're disconnected from the frequency of nature, which is also the frequency of self, the frequency of the greater self and spirit, whatever you believe with that, however you connect to that, is found in nature.
Yeah.
In the stillness.
It's hard to make money from nature.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking a bit about post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic stress. And me just taking over. What I wanted to say about that, though, because I'm not taking the...
You can take the mic. Let's go.
I
was actually about to. I was about to segue into that. So we're connected and telepathically somehow.
Nice. Well, it's no surprise that there is a mental health crisis happening here, and the crisis being a sense of disconnection, a sense of loneliness, a sense of something isn't right. And there's an awesome opportunity for us to look at that now that we are all realizing that that's a thing. Is it amplified in our time? I don't know, because I haven't lived in any other time that I can consciously remember. But right now it does seem like something's up, especially with suicide rates. We're experiencing suicidality in children. Now that's a big problem. That didn't used to happen.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. If there's any specific studies or numbers, or why, has anybody explored the cause of why there's child, and what age range are we really talking about here?
Okay, so I don't have any stats on suicidality in terms of children. But what I wanted to get into, if you don't mind, because I'm not your stat person. I wish I would, like, literally before I came here, I was like, I should know some stats. Like, it just makes somebody seem smart.
I don't necessarily need the stats. I just wanted to I wanted to hit home of the reality of what we're actually facing. Right. And so the listener of this can really feel like the intensity. Because I mean, an example of my sister has 2 kids that go to school, and they're in elementary school. And there was, it's really pointing back to social media and what that kind of does to children. And there was some kid that was like maybe 10, 11 years old, like in that age range, that committed suicide. And it was this sent ripples out through this thing. And it was because of the social media bullying and people egging on this kid to take his own life. And he did. And this not having the psychological maturity to understand any of that, and to get lost in a narrative and a story of who they think he is. And it's really, really sad. And it is becoming a bigger issue that's beginning to hit home. That story is pretty disconnected. It affected my sister's family in a way, and then her kids, then it's affecting me. And then, now it's coming here. So and that's just one example.
Yeah. Well, our technology is way outpacing our wisdom to use it. Right? Like, to be connected to that many people at that young of an age with no teacher to help guide you through that experience, to be so alone. I'm grateful that I didn't grow up at that time. But I think that these kids that are being born into this time right now, they're here for it. Even though it's really hard, and even though we joke around Gen Z being like weirdos, they're here for it. Like, they chose this very liminal space to be human for a reason. And I think we're going to discover that soon. But depression, like, I think it affects something like 236 million people worldwide. It's like the leading cause of what do they call it? Actually, I think suicide is the leading cause of death among like 20 to 30-year-olds in South Korea or something. And 1 in 4 people is going to have some kind of mental disturbance, like a chronic mental illness. In like 1 in 4 people, that's everybody practically, and if that's not you, you're on the spectrum somewhere. So having this awareness around us unacknowledging our traumas is bright and shiny now that we have all these stats and now that it's flooding the news, right? It's no surprise. What was surprising for me is, so PTSD, or PTS as it's more accurately known, not as a disorder, but PTS, post-traumatic stress. It's your nervous system experiencing too much too soon, which is the traumatic event, but then you're coping, the who you are on the other side of it is locked up and is different and is less able to thrive in the way that you were previously. Now, that discovery or that naming of that was very recent, actually. It was like the late 80s where we understood, we gave a name to this thing that has been around for as long as we've been alive, likely. What was curious is that post-traumatic growth, which is the psychological benefit or the positive psychological outcomes of experiencing something too much too soon. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't unbearable, but it also means that you learned something about yourself. You developed greater appreciation for life. You can relate to people better. When I say better, I mean deeper. You have more of a spiritual connection than you did before. So all these positive things can also come from trauma. Isn't it interesting that that didn't catch fire like PTSD did? And you got to wonder why. Why, when something as beautiful as, becoming a better version of yourself on the other side of trauma, which is going to happen to everyone. In our documentary, one of our experts, Anderson Todd, says nobody gets out of the parking lot without putting dents in the car. Everyone has trauma. You don't need to identify as being a traumatized person, but everyone has experienced too much too soon. Or on the flip side of that, not enough for too long of an amount of time, like neglect or something like that,
Yeah, trauma by omission. Where you're not getting the love or the presence. You might have a fantastic life, but maybe you're not receiving the thing that you need. And so that void of that thing is actually trauma as well.
Totally. And so when we look at the trajectory, the amount of awareness that was brought to PTSD, which rightfully so, we were coming off of the Vietnam vets who really needed this awareness. There needed to be a lot of funding put into that kind of initiative for first responders after 9/11, and just for people in general to have resources. This is great. And also, I can't not acknowledge that you don't make money from people feeling good about themselves. Capitalism just doesn't work. Who's going to buy all this shit if people actually are okay with themselves? So to really hone in on that negativity bias that we have around something hard being different on the other side of that, being bad, like maybe a psyop, I don't know. But that's why I'm here.
Well, as a part of the bigger, what we just talked about earlier, like the systemic, cultural, societal, like issues that we're facing, it all points back to this like uber capitalism, how we make money off of it. And the, negativity, the negative frequencies is like, because our neurological makeup is like 6 times more likely to connect with a fear-based response, because naturally the fear system of the brain is there to protect us and keep us safe. And so we're going to notice fear things so that we can keep our organism safe. And in this modern culture, we take advantage of that through marketing and all these fear frequencies and, the post-traumatic stress. And I think that's really fascinating, the post-traumatic growth. And it really comes down to a choice. So speak to like the two paths of you go through trauma and experience, and what makes a difference, or what decides if a person grows from this or they go deeper into the darkness from this. And, it's interesting because growth only happens outside of your comfort zone. And so even now we're learning like through things like cold plunge, even weight training and running, and like all of these things are like in a safe way creating resistance within the body so that we can grow. And that's the only place to grow. And so there's also like a getting stuck in the fear of discomfort, which actually, going out into the world is you're gonna experience some type of experience that challenges you in a way. And there's a lot of positive and it's necessary to grow as a human being. But there seems to be people that seek out growth and they really evolve in these experiences. Like for me, walking away from the NFL was extremely challenging, but I used it as this opportunity to propel myself deeper into the questions of who am I, what am I here to do? And that's been a really powerful journey. But there's also athletes that get stuck in the identity and they hold on, and then they get they use alcohol, drugs, whatever it is to numb themselves out from actually going on that journey. And it seems like that's the two kind of paths. I know there's a lot of nuance and complexity in there, but what between those two choices, what have you found is the factor that helps bring people into this growth mindset as opposed to this victim mindset?
Okay, so for the sake of simplicity, we're gonna talk linear graphs, but like you said, the human experience is super wiggly. It's not lines. But if you were to imagine your x-axis being okay, so you have a traumatic.
For someone who doesn't do stats, you have a linear graph with the x-axis. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I have a kind of a complex around math. I remember being in 4th grade and spacing out during math class and like coming back to the board, and a lot of math had happened within a very short amount of time. And I literally had this thought in my head, like, I'm done here. This is when I quit.
Never again.
Never again. And I swear, I don't think I've learned anything past that point. I've made it a few like bits and pieces here. Failed college algebra 3 times. They invented a new class for me called mathematical theory. So idiot journalists like me could get past the math part, which had no math. It was just history of math. So I think that sometimes I bring math in just to remind myself I can do it. So anyway.
Talk about trauma. Let's explore this.
Right. I know. Yeah. It would be irresponsible of me not to share my trauma on this podcast. So if we were to think about like, what is trauma? Okay. So trauma is something that a traumatic event is a moment in time. It can be a big, remarkable moment, or it can be a series of moments, something prolonged. But the thing that makes it traumatic is like a sense of trust being broken. So you expect something to be like a certain way, and then at some point it's not, and like, let's say your dad picks you up from school late often, but your dad's always late. It's like not a big deal, right? Just dad's late and everybody knows that about dad. If though dad tells you, I promise I'm going to pick you up on time. I know it's hard for you. I promise. There's like, is that traumatic? Dad picking you up late from school? Like looking at that, that wouldn't make a very good movie. But the experience of it is like, I can't trust dad, like, then who can I trust? What can I trust? In a bigger scale, you trust that you're going to see your little girl grow up and have a long life, and you're going to see grandkids and all this, and your child gets sick and dies. It's no one lied to you, but there was a trust that was broken, a trust, this expectation of life. So I think one of the factors that can make something traumatic from the very beginning, somebody can have something really hard happen to them and not be traumatized by it. And the same thing can happen to somebody else and they can be traumatized by it. It all depends on what have you like really mentally prepared yourself for, is one of the things. And I'll throw in another story here. So my partner was in the Canadian military, high-level Canadian military, for a very long time. And the type of PTSD that would come out from that group was more physical, like more TBI focused than psychological, because they spent like $1 million per soldier the first year on training. And one of the things they do to train these humans is to think about practically every single scenario. Imagine your friend blowing up and parts of them ending up in your mouth, like crazy shit. And then how are you going to feel on the other side of it? Maybe bad, probably bad, but I'm going to live, and just constant visualizations of worst case scenarios. Now, clearly that has some costs to that too. When you get on the other side, there's a lot less chance of really tough things happening, but you're still thinking about a lot of that tough stuff happening. But when things do go bad, they're okay. They're here for it. They've trained
because they've gone through it. They've projected the experience in their mind. So they've basically confronted the emotional experience and maybe the fight or flight experience beforehand. So when it happens, they're like, okay, I'm good because the worst case scenario is I've gone through it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Another example that may be more relatable. Oh, well, let me finish that off. A huge section of the military veterans that have PTSD have never been deployed. Now, why would that be? Because something that level of trust was broken because they were training to go somewhere. They were training to do the hard thing. They were preparing for it, and then it never happened. And then so like there's this void of like, what did I just spend my whole life doing? Sure, I'm not dead, and sure, I didn't have to do anything that people would say I should be traumatized about, but just the act of not going feels like I'm a fraud, like I shouldn't exist, something like that. Isn't that interesting?
That's fascinating. And I'm just thinking about, because I really love how you're simplifying trauma into this. Anytime a sense of safety and trust is broken, and if you think about us as kids, and this is why I need to lens out, like we all have experienced trauma, because when we're younger, we're kids, like we're fully taken care of and we're safe. And if you're in a safe environment, you can probably get away with a little bit longer experience. But at some point, you're going to realize like your parents aren't perfect. They're going to do something that hurts you. And it could be something as simple as like, I need a break. As like I have a 2-year-old son. Like I need a break. I'm going to go drop you off at grandma's house for a weekend. And me and my partner are going to go like relax and have some time to ourselves. But the consciousness of that kid is like feeling abandoned and like, where are my parents at? These are my safe spaces, and now they're not here. And there's like that level of trauma that can be imprinted on the unconscious at such a young age can really affect the entire life story of this human organism, which is really fascinating. And then kind of painting it back to the experience of an athlete in my time in the NFL, in this idea of safety and communication and feeling like blindsided by a lot of different experiences. And, I find like when I was younger, I told myself like, I don't know what the big deal is. Like I would play this game the rest of my life for free. But then I got and I loved the game so much with all of my heart. And I got to the NFL, and it just, that trust started getting eroded by the business side of everything. And there was a lot of times where words weren't kept and the communication wasn't like super clear. And I felt betrayed and humiliated and rejected like multiple times throughout the career. And when I decided to walk away, there was so much variable in that decision. But part of it was this grieving, this disconnection, this feeling like this game eroded the trust I had and the love I had for the game. And there's a deep grieving process of really healing that so that I could get back to the innocence, and it's really, I'm just externally processing this now. It's almost as if this healing journey that we're all going on, and we all have our own things deep inside ourselves to heal, is this journey back to the innocence of creating that safety and that joy and that light within ourselves, that all of this trauma has been overlaid, because if we don't feel safe, we're not going to be able to interact with reality in a safe way, which we create all these stories to protect ourselves.
Right. Oh, I love that insight. That was great. Another thing that came up for me there around athletes is that performative bit. And you tell me if this resonates or not, because I'm not an ex-athlete, but in the way that I do see myself in your community is I was very performance-based. So that's the way I was brought up. I was brought up to play the piano, not in any like professional sense, but to perform, to be the perfect daughter, to be a doctor when I grew up. That didn't happen. But, be good. And
society's idea of the expectations of this is what success looks like. And if you don't reach this, then you're not successful.
Right. And the gooder you are, the more praise you're going to get, the more love you're going to get, the more validation you'll get. And my parents are fantastic. All they wanted for me was to find success, to be happy, right? And that meant we're going to train you so that the way that you grow up will be like, we're going to do our job, basically. They were just trying to do their job. But for me, I was like, oh my God, am I not lovable unless I'm crushing it? And I wasn't inherently good at crushing things. Like, I'm not like really good at anything. So I always felt like I'm not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. And then coming out of this phase of my life, which coming from an athletic background, it's a very distinct phase of life where sure you've been training your whole life to be really good at this thing, and people are validating that and like loving on you and all this stuff. And then this is all glorified. And so it's building these incredible walls, like this castle. But then you get on the other side of that and you can see that like real love and real validation is an inside job. And when you're alone and you're not performing, or you don't have that job anymore and nobody cares about you because you're not super athlete or you're not high level military, you're just some guy walking down the street. Do you still exist? Like, do you still matter? And like, for me, that was a big thing that has come up for me, was like, there's no dramatic exit from this performative state of being for me. But I did feel this very distinct, like, who am I if I'm not being validated? Who am I if I'm not providing some kind of value or entertainment or like making you feel good about yourself? Do I even exist? And I think that maybe athletes could experience a similar thing.
Yeah, I love that analogy you used. I use it quite often. It was like I had this image of what I wanted to create in my life. And I wanted to be a professional athlete. I wanted to live this dream that so many young boys have. And through hard work, obviously, and all the intangibles it takes to pursue that level of success, and a little bit of, opportunity and circumstance that got me there. But I had this image of like this big mansion that I wanted to live in. And if everything went perfectly, I would be, living happy in this big, safe, mansion. And I got there and I built it up and it was big and spacious and I could bring my family and friends in there. But then I started looking at the windows and it's like, it feels like there's bars on these windows. So when's the last time I've actually left this house? I have never left this house. This psychological story of who I am is literally in the very fabric of the walls I built around myself. And so I wanted to know, like, what is life like outside of this house? Like if I opened the door and just walked out, what would that be like? And I felt like I couldn't because I'd built it up so strong. And I had my family and my friends living in there with me. And like they were attached to the identity of like, Joe's a football player. We're friends or family or connected to Joe. And so we get to live in this mansion too. It might not be their mansion, but they're a part of it. And when I walked away, it was an active participation in stripping away and breaking down that house. And I slowly did that. And I got outside of the house and I was alone. I was isolated. I felt like, holy cow, like, who am I? Where do I go? And we talked a little bit about before the show is like, there's some guilt to that too. Cause, I had made a lot of money. Now I had all this freedom and I could literally do anything I wanted. But that as an athlete, let me paint a picture. I knew exactly the roadmap to success. Every single morning I woke up, I knew exactly what I needed to do to be successful. My whole life, everything was bubble wrapped for me because as soon as I had this opportunity to make it to the next level, what they do is they build this program for these athletes to, if you show up and do these things each day, you're going to continue to find success and we're going to kind of take care of everything, like whether it's school, the taxes, we have support for like taking care of your body. Like you just show up, wake up early, go into the gym, you eat, health, bulk up, work out, and rest. And everything else in your life is going to be taken care of. And then when that's all gone, it's like, okay, I can do anything I want, but holy cow, that is so overwhelming. It's like akin to, I use the analogy like a prison. It's got to be akin to, a prisoner being in prison for, 10, 20 years, then all of a sudden getting out and being like, okay, I'm free, but what does freedom really look like? Right. And it took me a long time. Like, luckily I had the intuition to get moving, to go explore, to head off, into the sunset. And I bought a van and I let go of all the physical things that were holding me down because I knew that they were anchor points into an old way of life. And so I let all of that go. I gave it all away and I bought a van so I could get mobile. And I was like, I need to go just explore. And I'm like vibrating right now because I'm so grateful that I had that intuition to go do that because it was really hard and it was really overwhelming, but at least I was moving somewhere. And in that process of moving somewhere is where magic happened. And that's where the energy movement, the stagnancy of energy is really where a lot of this depression, trauma, like we can't process trauma when you're stagnant and stuck in it. And I think movement, and that's why travel is so powerful and impactful. It literally creates new neural pathways, expands your perspective. But if you're stuck in a city and you're depressed, I think the best thing you can really do is like create some type of spontaneity and go experience something new.
Yes, there's an equation that I heard somewhere, I don't know where it comes from, but personality plus environment equals behavior. So sometimes it's hard to change your personality. Like it's hard to change the way that you are feeling and being. Easiest thing to do is change your environment, and that can change anything, Like I was watching The Crown the other day, and I think the Queen said something like, "There's no problem that can't be solved by a brisk walk in the gardens." And I was like, "That's kind of true."
There's a lot of deep layers to that too. Like we were talking about earlier, like connecting with life. Like it reminds you like to get out of here. Like a lot of even like depression and a lot of these traumas, like you said, like why can someone go through the exact same experience and handle it in a different way. And it really is the story and the loop that gets created in the mind about who I am, what does this mean about me, how do I process this, what, and like all the emotions, and you get stuck in these loops. And if you have the tools, I think that's something to explore too. And I'd love to get your perspective is, how can somebody, either start on this journey or work through it? And what does make a difference to give people the actual tools to process something in a different way than somebody else?
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk tools because that's where things get really interesting. But to finish answering the question you previously asked around what qualities might somebody have that can have them choose between one path or the other. Another one, so there have been a couple waves of research that have gone into post-traumatic growth study. The first one being Dr. Tedeschi and Dr. Calhoun on the original naming of it. And then the second wave was something around trying to understand like the physiological impacts of what post-traumatic growth does, psychological and physiological impacts. But now this last one is, or the most recent one, which still doesn't have a lot of funding behind it. It's still fairly unknown. We're trying to understand like what is growth even, and are there markers that like personality traits more or less that can make somebody more susceptible to growth rather than stress. And just a caveat here, growth and stress happen at the same time. Like you cannot have one without the other. So to say that I have post-traumatic growth disorder versus post-traumatic stress disorder is like, it doesn't make any sense, because when you experience something that changes you, you feel more on the other side of it, unless you're disassociating, which is its own thing. But one of the personality traits that they discovered will make someone more inclined to experience growth rather than feeling stuck in a non-coping state is openness. Talking big five, right? Openness was the biggest thing versus being closer on the neuroses spectrum. And then also extroversion. Now that one to me seems fairly simple because one of the more helpful things you can do when you're stuck in a loop is to bring somebody else in to help you out of that loop. And extroverted people tend to bring other people in or to force themselves onto other people to like, help me with this. Or like, let me just share this. Yeah. Let me just talk this through with you.
And it's interesting because part of the experience of these kind of traumatic events or depression is like, it because of the guilt or the shame, it like creates this internal thing of like, I don't want to share this, which is, it creates even worse loop of feeling isolated, alone, which makes it even worse. And that's probably the biggest challenge is when you're in that state, share it with somebody, but you want nothing else, like nothing other than to not share it with them.
Totally. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm just like headbutted this mic. I'm so glad you brought that up because every single one of us has a kind of like thing we're embarrassed about, a really intense, embarrassing, non-remarkable, non-fancy, but like just thing that we're ashamed of that we think people will judge us for. Every single one of us has that. And this thing that we have built into our operating system to make us feel like why we're alone in that is very interesting. I don't know exactly where that comes from or why that is an evolutionary part of us that's been brought, that's lasted, but that is not right. And if you can't share it with people because they'll judge you, like, and you know that that's a fact, then find better friends because there are plenty of people out there that will listen. I forgot where we're going. We're off track.
And even like judgment, though, a lot of it is really not even, it's the fear of judgment from others. I mean, there's obviously an experience of being judged, but in that process, you're only able to receive that judge if you judge yourself. And so it's hard because if you're going to feel judged for sharing it, that's the very thing that's going to keep you from sharing it, which is the shame. And shame just doesn't want to be seen. And so I think that's the biggest thing is when we're able to go, and that's where sacred space and reaching out and finding safe spaces, whether it's, traditional therapy or, go into a ceremony or go into a breath work or going somewhere where you feel safe enough that you can feel seen and heard in your shame. And I think, this is a number I'm putting on this, but I feel like 95% of this healing journey is being able to speak something that we have so much shame around and have it feel seen and heard and not judged in that space. There's something so powerful about the release that happens. And in the work that I do, I've had, I've facilitated group work quite extensively and specifically with athletes. And I've had these retreats where, holding space for these athletes and I have them journal about something that's just, a lot of shame around. And I have them share it in the group. And it's fascinating. You can just literally see where the energy gets stuck. and they're just like, and a lot of it is because there's this emotional charge tied to this shame and to that unprocessed emotion. Because we don't have the tools to feel, we haven't been taught how to grieve, we don't feel safe enough to feel, especially as men, because we're told like, men don't cry, hold it together. So this systemic traumatic trauma that's been passed down over generations is just like built into us. And so we don't want to access it. And then creating that safety, and just, hey, breathe into it, like you're safe here. And I've had guys where it's like takes them like 5 minutes and they're just stuck. They're just stuck and they just hold the space. And then finally it's like just a few words come and it breaks the ice, and there's tears and energy and just it flows. And I can even feel it now. And they just say the thing. And to all of us, the thing is not a big deal. But to them, it was this experience that was so shameful to them. And they were judging themselves so much. And we just receive them. We love them like, hey, it's okay. And I've had moments where just that release of energy and release of shame has literally changed the trajectory of some of these men's lives. And they feel lighter, they feel more free, and then they're able to access those emotions with not as much shame. And it's like that initial courage it takes really to say, I'm going to speak this out loud and put myself in a position where I could be judged. But letting it go and letting it out and then being received in love, that's why the safe containers are so important. Because if you go, like you said earlier, if you have friends that are going to judge you, and you don't feel safe enough to share that, and you do get judged, like that's going to just re-traumatize and kind of close you up even more. And so being able to surround yourself with people that really do love you, really do see you, and that's really, do they love themselves? Do they see themselves? Are they on the path and doing the work? So I think that's really cool. It comes back to safety once again.
Yeah. I love that you're facilitating an experience for like tough people to be able to express themselves, because it's usually, that's the hard part. It's the right before you do the thing that's the hardest. Like right before you jump out of the plane, it's not falling out of the plane that's hard. It's just like that first step, before you break up with somebody, it's the, oh God, I have to do this hard conversation. I'm going to ruin this person's life. After that's done, that's kind of the easy part. So even, I think it's funny to look at that process. As we were joking earlier, if I could bring you to tears, I've done my job. But like, it's so true, to have that release of emotion, even seeing somebody crying, like ugly crying, for your untrained eye, you'd be like, wow, that doesn't look like that person is getting better. That looks like the opposite of that. It kind of goes back to our societal understanding of what getting better is and what is the point of even all of this. I often come back to that question, what is the point of all of this? Why am I spending so much of my time and effort wanting to understand something like post-traumatic growth, and having a podcast and getting in the film space? Like being a documentary film producer is probably like the dumbest career job I could ever have. It's like so high risk, so high reward. But when it comes to the fulfillment and how much I care about it, I'm like, yeah, I literally couldn't do anything else. I mean, I might at some point, but but there's this like, why? What is getting better? Even if the conversations that I'm having with people like you is just, that's a lot of crying. Well, yeah, that's what it looks like. It's a feeling everything. Like that's what life is about. We wouldn't have been evolved to feel so much if we weren't supposed to.
So talk about the documentary. It's The Dark Night of Our Soul.
Yeah.
And it's exploring this concept of post-traumatic growth. Where did this desire to tell this specific story, like you shared, it's not for the faint of heart. It's really challenging. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of input, a lot of time, and the potentials of it just not hitting and not doing it in a good way. And like, especially now with content, like if you're going to put something out that's highly produced, it's got to be really good for it to get eyeballs on and for the story to even hit, and then for it to even have a potential to return on investment, because there's that angle too. So why this specific story and this specific conversation, specifically around this and your connection to it?
So there's like 3 distinct parts of my life that come up that make this make sense for me. The first one being when I was young, I always felt like an outcast and like the weird one. And I don't know why, just like felt like that. And that thought form was so strong that other people thought I was weird. You know what I mean? Like, and I do know where it came from. Again, it's a non-remarkable story, but my mom's Korean. So I'm half Korean, I'm half white. And I went to a really small Catholic school in LA. And my mom, being from South Korea, she felt like she had this weird relationship to white women. Like she wanted to be accepted into their groups, but she felt so like different. And so her discomfort around being around white people made me feel like, am I supposed to feel weird here too? So I didn't know what was going on. I didn't
You're just
realize
modeling
this.
that as a young person.
Yeah. I was like, okay, now I feel weird. And, I'm half white, like I shouldn't. Like there's no reason. My whole family's white. There's something around being at school and seeing my mom act a certain kind of way, which is very subtle. I just realized she was a little bit different than she was at home. That snowball went downhill fast. And so I didn't really talk much when I was younger either. I wasn't a mute, but I was a real listener. And I think this combination of thinking that I'm weird and also I don't feel like I have anything important to say, but I'm really listening and I'm soaking it all in, made for somebody who is very aware of the underdog, almost to like a detriment. And then someone who could see the beauty in those weird people as well. Because now I'm a storyteller, and I realize that's what I was doing my whole life, which my younger years, which was just listening, feeling the nuances, understanding or seeing, why are these girls different at the slumber party? Why are we doing this anyway? I don't get it. Why are we all shopping together? And why are you different when she's around? And why are you different when he's around? This whole weird game we're playing, and me not being capable of playing it because I don't know why. And so that whole experience had me realize life is hard. I don't know. I just had a life is hard feeling when I was a kid. It didn't seem fun. Even though I had all the things that should have made my life fun, I just it was hard for some reason. So fast forward into high school, I was like, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be gregarious, charming, funny, maybe good at math. No, that never happened. But I'm going to be different me, because I can't survive if I'm this ostracized weirdo that I had co-created for myself, this other version.
This happened when you went from a new school into a high school, and you're like, this is an opportunity to change who I am and how I'm viewed.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I had a very similar experience with when I went and played football. I became an athlete, and all of a sudden I was walking by my friends that weren't, and there was all of a sudden this separation of us hanging out with a new crowd, and it created this new story. But I wanted to be that, but I didn't even know and have the language for that. But experiencing it was really fascinating.
So interesting what can happen in a short amount of time, right?
Yeah.
Because over that span, was that 4 years of high school or something? I think about those people and I can remember their faces and their full names, and everything feels so real. Now you meet somebody, you know them for 4 years, you still barely know them. Anyway, but yeah, I knew basically 30 people my whole life, from kindergarten through 8th grade. Those were those people. And I was severely bullied, isolated for 5 of those years. So I had no friends. So I kind of downplay this traumatic time in my life, but it sucked. It really, really sucked. The problem is, going to this next phase, I didn't have any of the tools, any of the agency to think that I could change without drinking. So I started drinking a lot. And it was simply a problem because I knew that I wasn't doing this in a way that was I knew I was fucking up, basically. It didn't affect my grades. It didn't affect my relationship with my parents or anything from the outside. I don't think anybody really knew I was doing it. It, in fact, may have been a very standard way of getting through high school, which is drinking and smoking and stuff. But to me, I was like, this is not right. But I don't know how else to do this without these substances to numb out this part of myself, this amount of sensitivity that I have. But in that, I also gained some skills around communication. And I really, really worked on it because I wasn't an innate good communicator at all. I really sucked at that. So now I have some skill sets around seeing the underdog and really having a soft spot for them. And then realizing that all these popular kids that I'm hanging out with, which were also amazing people, I just say that in jest, but they were great. They have their own shit too. And then I was like, oh, everybody's going through something, but nobody's talking about it. That's weird, And in fact, I like the people that talk about it. There's something about that honesty that I feel safe with. Because if you're not going to tell me some kind of vulnerable aspect of yourself, I don't know who you are. And I didn't have language around that at the time, but I just knew that I liked people that were more open with their shit. So, okay, I'm going to fast forward quite a bit now and get into my adult life. Now, after getting into a podcasting and journalism and story writing and whatnot, meeting my partner. And like I'd mentioned, he was in the military for a very long time. And so they're like, congratulations, you get the gold star disability package. Because when you're done here, you're going to have so much PTSD. It's not even funny. Right. And though he like acknowledged, and everybody in his unit in the military generally acknowledges that PTSD is a possibility, it just felt like, really, that's it? Like that's all you get on the other side of this career other than a pension, is traumatic memories and a body that doesn't work anymore and some TBI that's incurable. Like that can't be, because if we look at the reality of the situation, another reality is that you guys are all different people on the other side. A lot of them joined post 9/11, right? Wanting to be of service. Maybe they joined because they came from a poor family and this was the only way to like make something of themselves. Lots of reasons people will join the military, and a lot of them are rooted in some kind of trauma or wanting to be of service or wanting to be better or something. Like many great endeavors always start with some kind of darkness. Now, throughout that, maybe some of them have done things that they didn't want to do, but they were told they had to do. Sometimes they made mistakes that ended up in really bad situations. Maybe somebody died, right? All of these things happen, but also in that, you can't deny that you learned something about yourself. You can't deny that you gained some great friendships, which are like, that's one of those infamous things about being on a team, right? Brothers for life, family for life, sacrificing your body, like believing in something greater than yourself. All you have is faith, the odds are against you, but all you have is just like each other or something greater. And so like, what is that? And so that's what we discovered for ourselves, because, okay, he has traumatic brain injury, which results in some like psychological instability, but also the amount of wisdom that he had on the other side of it was so great. And he was like, no, I can beat this. Maybe my TBI might be forever, but I know that there's another side to this coin, because there's two sides to every coin. So why are we just talking about that one? So he went on a long self-discovery, like self-induced research basically on how to make this work. And athletes and military people and entrepreneurs, like that's also kind of person that's ripe for post-traumatic growth because of that agency. That's another thing. Your innate belief that you can change. And so that's something that comes from, I don't know if it comes from those professions and it's learned, or people are just brought into those types of professions because they feel like they're high in hope.
They have that makeup,
yeah,
personality trait of and what they have achieved. Like I've had to change the story of who I am so many times throughout my career to reach the next level, or change something that maybe I was like, there's a moment when I got cut a couple times, and when I got cut, I had a choice of, okay, either I'm not good enough or I can change and work harder to continue to prove that I belong there. And I had moments where I've completely revamped my story of who I am so that I could reach higher levels of my potential. And that's why I love working with athletes so much, and why I'm so passionate, because athletes, like military, like really special humans, what we're able to achieve and accomplish. And when we lose that thing, if we get stuck in that, I'm nothing without this thing, who you are is actually one of the most special peoples with the most special makeup and the intangible skills to really grow into something that can really have a massive impact in the world. But when you get lost in that, when you give them the tools of like, hey, let's go on this journey, let's use the tools and your understanding of how to handle failure, how to change, how to grow into this deeper journey of self-discovery, it's some really profound things can happen. And we can really create this, utilize these very special humans for greater impact in the world after their careers are over.
Totally. Military athletes, entrepreneurs, they can do so much, like you were saying, the capacity to do output, and in a way that is also impactful towards other people it's crazy. Like they're a really special community of people. And that's why I really like that they're primed for post-traumatic growth, is because there's no shortage of trauma that comes from constantly changing, constantly testing your edges, constantly putting your body through things that most people would never do. I just got to figure out, how does that translate into the civilian world? And what is your final mission? What is your final game? Well, it seems to me that the final mission, the final game, is understanding what's happening inside. And that might be the scariest thing. So, the last part of this story on why we became interested in post-traumatic growth is that it seems, this is controversial, Like it is a bit of a moral responsibility to heal yourself. Why that's controversial is because to pressure someone to just get better is not productive. And sometimes things take a long time. Sometimes it may take a lifetime to heal yourself. And if we go around saying, well, it's our moral responsibility to not be fucked up. Excuse me for cursing on your show.
That's okay.
It's your moral responsibility. And we start finger pointing. That's when things can get really messy. And that's not what we're trying to do here. And at the same time, there needs to be a conscious effort towards expanding our consciousness and raising awareness around what else is possible, not despite traumatic experiences, but because of them. Because we have a never-ending number of issues right now. We have climate issues. We have societal racist issues. We have issues. We have all these adults with unresolved trauma that are trying to make solutions for that. And however innovative and however exciting and however it's trying to come from a good place, it's going to be steeped through this mesh of like incompleteness and ulterior motives and how am I validated and all these other things. So that's why this has become like way more important than just an individual pursuit. If we're now talking about the planet not being able to bounce back or something, like if we're talking about all of these lovely gifts that we're leaving for our children, the state of the world, it seems like the only notable and achievable legacy that we can really leave behind that we can create our own epoch, what we're known for is healing ourselves. Like packaging and flying to Mars and all this stuff, yeah, that's fine. But to me, those are distractions. If we don't heal what's going on here, we're just going to leave them with a bunch of party favors that they're going to have to clean up anyway.
Yeah. The only way to really truly change the world is by changing yourself.
Yep.
And, I think a simplified way to look at this is, the fundamental consciousness that you have is this victim mindset of getting stuck in, life is happening to me as opposed to life is happening for me. I feel like that's the great awakening that every single human needs to go through, is taking responsibility for where you're at in life. And it's really a hard pill for individuals to swallow because they could grow up in a really traumatic, like powerfully intense, like traumatic experience of life and circumstances that they didn't really have control over, like what family you grew up in, what environment you grew up in, the experiences that you had. And I'm not saying you're responsible for those experiences, but you are responsible for how you view them and how you evolve through them. And until you go from that, why is this happening to me, victim mindset, to this is happening to me, how can I grow through this and evolve and change? That's the fundamental, if I could point it all the way down to one different level in frequency and consciousness and how you view the world, the lens in which you view the world is this happening to me or is this happening for me? And until you get to a point where, okay, this is happening for me, where is this taking me? And a lot of times it's into the unknown, because as humans, we like to create certainty, which comes back to safety. Especially if I'm going, like I have a lot of trauma that's stored up within my bodies, I'm going to do everything in my power to create safety within my life and within my circumstances, so I don't feel like I have to confront any of that anymore. And so people do everything in their power to build comfort around them, but then they start realizing that's like growth only happens outside of your comfort zone. And so shifting that mindset is really the fundamental piece. And it seems like that's really the intention behind this show is in this documentary, is to give people some storytelling and some experience shares of people that have gone through it, and hoping to really elicit that shift in consciousness really, and begin taking responsibility with where you're at and seeking out help, support, tools, whatever it is. There's a plethora of them. But is that kind of where the intention of the documentary really takes shape?
Yeah, it's well, the primary aim of the documentary is to raise awareness, period, on post-traumatic growth, to even know that it's a thing. Just having that awareness that it's possible, and not even possible, but it's actually probable, just based on like the bioevolutionary function of expansion and contraction, of destruction, of death and rebirth. Like it's all cyclical and we don't live outside of that. And so our emotions they fall into that equation as well. Our way of life falls into that equation as well. if you were to ask somebody like, what does living a good life mean? They might say, you fall in love with your sweetheart and you get married and you're together forever and you live until you're 100 years old and you have 5 kids and you have a house and your family loves you and all these things, right? And when life doesn't go like that, does that mean it's a bad life? How many lives actually go like that? So let's be real around what it means to be human, right? We've separated ourselves. I think this is full circle talking about nature again. We've separated ourselves so much from being nature. The definition of nature in the dictionary is basically any living thing that's not human on this planet. It's like, whoa, that's interesting.
That's very telling.
Yeah. Why are we so different than nature, right?
We can't be separated from the experience of life. Like we are nature.
We are nature. Yeah. But we're so smart. We've created all these wonderful systems to keep ourselves alive for long times, or like our mortality rates through birth are like, at least in the Western world, like you're going to have a baby just fine, as long as you get it past a certain point. Dying during childbirth isn't as much of an issue as it used to be. We're confronted with our mortality less and less as we live in these 4 walls, like the castle you had built for yourself, like the loft that I live in. I can get food basically delivered right into my mouth. Like I don't even have to go outside. I'm very, quote, safe in here. And so we've created a false, there's a great word that I don't exactly remember where it came from, but it's like a fake survival state. When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we got food, water, all that stuff taken care of, but our survival needs are like, they're different now. We
more around like acceptance and approval and stuff like that.
Kind of. It's more like I need. Yeah, exactly. That is it. Yeah, I need to be understood. I need to be liked. I need to be hot. I need to have a full head of hair or something like that. All these like needs. And if I don't have that, they're finding that in terms of suicidality, which I brought this up a couple times, even though my understanding of it is fairly limited. But you don't have to be depressed to kill yourself. Like they're finding that you can completely skip that step. The thing that is more of an indicator of somebody that's going to end their life, which is like your ultimate giving up moment, which everybody has a right to do that. By the way, I have a stance. If you want to kill yourself, go ahead and do it. Who am I to like make that hard on you? You'll probably come back in a different form, but I'm going to do everything I can to show you that there are other options. Is actually this sense of perfectionism, which is something that I think athletes experience, military experience, a lot of people experience, whether you're in that profession or not. It's the sense of who do I expect myself to be? Who do I think other people expect me to be? And it's a little easier to work with when it's just you and your own expectations. But when you're coming off of a team or something like that, where people literally did have expectations of you and you don't fulfill those now in the civilian world or in the regular world, you think you should be, 29 and be super mobile and strong. But now you have arthritis, and like massive concussions and all these things. That comparison to who you think you should be is so detrimental for some people that can be enough. And so that's just something that I wanted to bring up here, because as we talk more and more about like post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress, they happen at the same time. They coexist, because you'll never unhave the experience that was too much too soon or not enough for too long. That'll always be a part with you, but your relationship to it will be more graceful. That doesn't mean you're not going to have bad days. So when we talk about what does it mean to get better, what does it mean to experience growth, it means it's not going to look like what they say it's going to look like. It's not going to look like having more money, although it might be, but it also might be you giving everything away. That might be growth for you. I'm working on another documentary with this gentleman named Kyle, and he's a very well-off dude. He's a Vietnamese boat refugee. So he didn't start off that way. He started off like jungle floor kind of guy. And he has an amazing story, but he worked his way up the ranks. And when COVID went down, which is another reason why we did this documentary, collective trauma. Like everyone went through something, whether it was a fear of death or a mistrust of the government or something, or like disagreements with the family, something happened. So it's a great, great time to be like resolving this now. Kyle having now all this money and us talking about putting a documentary together, it's like a huge challenge that we have to work with in terms of it being accepted by the masses is how do we make poor little rich boy now, like, how do people have a cathartic experience with him? Because now he has moved into a different rank of human, somebody that has money. Well, he should be fine. And that's another thing that I really want to like highlight here is a lot of these coaching programs that people put out there, or a lot of the marketing that goes out is you can make 6 figures doing this, or you can find your soulmate, or all these things. They don't often talk about, well, does Kyle have to give this all up for people to care about him? Can you resonate with the human part of somebody despite how they look on the outside? And unfortunately, that's a huge hurdle we're going to have to go through. We can do it artistically, but that's a reality. Like, Joe, you're a ex-football player. Or you know, like, what do you have to complain about? You're from Orange County, right? But we have to look past like the remarkableness of the trauma itself and be like, hurt hurts. Pain is pain. It doesn't matter. And the shiny outside, the Prince Charming, all the money, all the fame, that's the outside. And often those walls are way thicker and harder to bust through than if you're starting from like a more, I don't know, like non-remarkable state.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what our society puts on, this whole marketing angle, that void that you feel inside of yourself. If you fill it with these things outside of yourself, you'll find the happiness, you'll find the fulfillment, you'll find it through success. And I'm really grateful that I got to a point at such a young age where I made all the money. I lived out a dream that most people just dream of. Literally, I was living my dream. I had the fiance who was super beautiful, and our relationship was a little bit toxic, and there's some deeper healing in there and patterns that I was able to uncover. But I had the nice car. I had everything I'd ever wanted. And at the age of 29, I still felt like, what else is there, like, more? Like, is more going to make me happy? I mean, I was making $4 million a year, and I felt unsatisfied. I had this moment when I was in the locker room, like, I'm making $4 million. This person's making $8 million. They're not that much better than me. I need more money because I still feel unsatisfied. And I think that's a great foundational systemic issue that we're facing, is we're looking for those things outside of ourselves to fill the void that we all have within ourselves, this feeling of lack. And it's an insatiable desire. That's why people that make a lot of money, they're still wanting to make more money. They never feel a place of contentness until they find that love and that fulfillment within themselves. And it's an inside job. And getting to a point where I was like, if I could point it back to one thing I confronted, was that very story of I should be happy and I'm not. And there's something, I don't know what it is, that feels unfulfilled within me, and I want to know how to fill this. And that's when I actively participated in the stripping away of all the things I thought would bring me happiness. And I got to a point where I'm going to live in my van, and I'm going to travel the country, and I'm going to explore from this place of understanding myself outside of this mansion, this identity that I was viewed at. And that was a journey. I mean, I'm still uncovering, but now I'm able to create from a place of not attaching to the outcome of my value is attached to this thing that I'm creating or this money that I'm making. And that's a very real dance, because we live in a collective field that is a program that is constantly telling me I'm not good enough unless X, Y, Z. That's who I am. And I've, really been uncovering this deeper story of rejection within my life. And I think, spiritually, I think it's the foundation of all of our feeling of lack and feeling of rejection, and trying to seek approval and acceptance and love and from all these things outside of ourselves. But you really can't find that fulfillment unless you go inside and find that reservoir of love within yourself. And in order to do that, you have to connect to something that is greater than yourself.
Right.
Which is the foundation of all spirituality. And, even spirituality, we get attached to the thing that is outside of ourselves, like whether it's the plant medicine or the belief structure that creates safety, and or the deity that we're worshiping. And when we do that, we're still filling this void with something outside of ourselves. And until you find that reservoir of love and contentment, and really finding the foundation of I am love because I am, and I don't need to prove anything. And that's a really hard thing to do that I'm still continuing to uncover.
It's very hard, because we love when things are extraordinary, don't we? We love a peak, and some of us really love a valley. But like that middle area, I think when we talk about what is spirituality, it's very ordinary. It's like just enjoying little ordinary things. And we can go through ceremony and bring in all of theatrics, which they need to be brought in. I think we have a serious lack of theatrics and ceremony in our everyday lives that's really meaningful. And all of that is to build you up and to celebrate and to like maybe tear you down in some instances. What we're doing here in the really real, which is just two people sitting on a couple couches, right? Not waiting for the next spiritual experience, but like having one right now. And maybe, to go back to your question around like kids and why they're struggling, there's you can experience anything you want to experience in life. There was a time where you couldn't experience a Grand Canyon unless you went there. And now you can see pictures of it. There's a time where you couldn't listen to music from Jamaica unless you went there. And now we can listen to it. We have access to everything. And I think that probably removes a sense of awe. And awe seems, I haven't really thought this through, but like it seems like something we need. You remember the last time you felt like amazed, right? That feeling, I could just like evoke it right now. I don't know what I was thinking about, but it feels like so like fuel, like the quickest fuel you can get. And maybe through this overstimulation, we've lost that part of, I don't even know what it is, but like we don't have that as much. And I can imagine for kids where you're just supposed to be awe-inspired all the time. Like this is new, that's new. But then you get it all in 1 year on your cell phone. You're like, what else is there? I have like 70 more years of this. Huh.
That's a really powerful point. Like that we're losing the awe of life that is found in the presence and finding that awe within the mundane, within the breath. So the breath is so powerful. You can contemplate the breath for your entire life and it just continues to teach you, and you uncover like it's literally the life force, the umbilical cord to everything. And the breath is this anchor point into the present moment. And to really just sit with the power and the simplicity of the breath and how the breath is the one thing that's with us from the moment we take our first breath until we die. I mean, it's just so potent and powerful, and we get so lost in like all these shiny things and so much going on. And it's like we're looking for those expansive experiences always to give us a sense of some type of feeling within. And if we're able to find that presence, and it's funny you talk about the Grand Canyon. I remember having a moment on my couch my final year of playing football, and I was on Instagram and I followed this national park page, and I was like looking at all these national parks. I'm like, holy cow, like these places and these pictures are so beautiful, but I can't connect with the awe within it. I can't connect with the frequency of like, what would it be like to stand in this and see it with my own two eyes? And that was part of the decision with all these variables that went into, why I did what I did. I wanted to see these places with my own two eyes. I wanted to stand in the experience of awe and create that. And on that journey, there's nothing like standing over the Grand Canyon. It's like, holy cow, it's seriously like I can feel it right now too. But how do we find that in the everyday? And I think what you shared with, some of the tools, I think, a lot of the things I'm learning about sacred space and profane space. And I forget who the philosopher is that talks about this, but there's a difference in space, right? And you can create sacred space through the simplicity of the intention of doing so and creating safety. For this, we before we dropped in, we took some breaths, we created a connection and create a container where this space is different than if we were just at a coffee shop and we just met and the frequency is not aligned. And so creating a sacred space as opposed to profane space is just really, I think, part of what we're missing as a society and culture is lacking the sacred. We're stripping the sacred out of everything that we do, and we wonder why we have these mental health crises. And I think reintroducing the sacred, and we have so much dogma around spirituality and religion and these different beliefs. So different verbiage, different language brings up different resistance within different people because of the belief and the eroding of these structures. And it's really about reintroducing the sacred through ritual, through ceremony, through the connection of the breath that I think will have a profound impact. And it's, again, super, super simple. Like having an altar space at home, you don't need to have any dogmatic belief around what that means. The power of the frequency of that is when you go to the same space, this is my sacred space where I'm going to sit in stillness with myself. There's an energy that builds. And as you do that, if you go to your altar, you'll feel different just by being in the presence of this thing that you create a connection with. Same thing with a garden, same thing with your chickens. There's this reintroduction of this reciprocity and this sacred energy. And when you're lacking the sacred within your life, I think it really begins to erode the meaning and the purpose, which leads to all these things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we as religion is starting to become less relevant for a lot of people. And I'm not promoting religion here, but I do want to highlight that there is that gap that you're talking about. There's a gap of, and John Vervaeke talks about this meaning, which he's also in the documentary, which is amazing. Meaning making, right? And creating, intention around something. And like, why is that necessary? As you were talking about that, I kept thinking like the human part of me, not the one that's sitting in this interview, but like Jessica was like, why is that important? You know, I wonder why. I know why we need food. I know why we need water. But if I were to explain this to somebody that's like, okay, so create an altar, set an intention, but why? How does that work? I mean, do you have an answer for that? I don't know. I feel like that might be one of those unanswerable questions.
Why? It's interesting. Like I think what all these religions and beliefs and ideas, all of them point back to even science, and it's all about trying to understand why, and all of it leads to the moment of surrender into the fact that it's a mystery. No matter how big our telescopes get and how far-reaching we can see with the human eye out into space, the universe keeps getting further and further away. And no matter how powerful the microscopes we have and the ability with the like Large Hadron Collider, I think that's, I'm saying that right, to hit like molecular atoms into each other so they explode, so we can see what's the foundation of the universe, the very fabric. How do we discover what's the base element of what we are? And we get to a point with quantum mechanics and quantum physics that we realize we're both particle and a wave of light. And they actually have these studies. It's like, oh, we're actually just vibration and frequency. And no matter how much we're trying so hard to discover, it's almost like the universe created this experience so that we can explore it into infinity forever. To actually, what's the point? To have the experience. Because if we knew, then there wouldn't be any experience.
Yeah.
And so the not knowing creates this desire to seek. And you get to a point, the paradox is you have to go on the journey of seeking to get to a point finally to realize, oh, the answer lives within me. And it's not anything to figure out. It's to surrender into the not knowing, and the letting go of the need to figure it out is where the freedom and the peace is found. And back to your story around suicide, I had a friend who was telling me a story, and he was confronting suicidal ideation in a very real way. And he got to a point where he was so in the darkness and so ready to take his own life, he actually had a loaded gun. And he had this moment where he was literally about to pull the trigger, and he had a conversation with if God, if you're real, give me an experience. And he was about to pull the trigger. And in that moment, the courage it takes to go into a point where I am at the bottom and I'm going to let go. It's this full moment of surrender. And in that moment, right when he surrendered, he experienced that letting go and that surrender before he pulled the trigger. And he had this mystical experience of all of the things that led him to that point, he was able to let go of. And he found this peace and this freedom that's so profound that brought him back in. He's like, oh, this moment is all that matters. And it's all of the baggage and stories of what I think I need to be to receive love, acceptance, validation, all these things that are the thing that is eroding the very foundation of why I think I need to. It's the attachment to those things. And so the letting go and the surrender into the mystery of life is the gift.
It reminds me of the 10th gene key, I think. We talked gene keys on this show?
I love it. So the people at the tattoo. I asked her before the show, I was like, you into gene keys? Because I was talking a few things. She's like, she just showed me her arm. I'm like, oh, we got it. Let's go.
Yeah. So I think it's the 10th gene key, the gift of naturalness, the shadow of self-obsession. And a lot of my close friends have this very prominent in their profile, which if you don't know what gene keys are, it's a system of understanding It's a combination of like the I Ching, these old parables that were synthesized into different archetypes of humanity. And it's also integrated into a kind of astrology, which a lot of other things, numerology, whatnot. So the 10th gene key anyway, I just seem to have a lot of these people in my group. It's seekers. Like, is this the archetype of the seeker? Who am I? What am I doing here? And the journey that they go on, that we all go on. And when I say they have this in their profile, it's a prominent like theme in their lives, but it's an archetype of humanity, which we all have. But these people, like, they really own it. So it's a process of understanding, like, who am I? And grappling with that. Like creating an identity. I'm this, I'm that, I'm a football player. I'm a podcaster. Here's my business card, all the things, right? And then you get to a certain point where you're like, oh man, I'm not those things, because I got stripped away. Like some of those things got stripped away. That's why finding purpose can be very tricky, and why like it might seem like semantics, but I like to differentiate life's work versus purpose. Because life's work is something that you can do externally that involves other people, like playing football, like running retreats. And if that goes up in flames, you won't lose your purpose, which is your purpose is to be the very best version of yourself. Nobody can take that away from you. So anyway, going into like stripping yourself from this identity and then seeking like, well, what else is there? You know, and it's this never ending journey of like, am I this? Am I that? No, like, and it's a process that ultimately leaves you at, if you're lucky, at realizing the whole pursuit was ridiculous in the first place. And then you just are, period. You just be, period. And that's it. But the thing that Richard Rudd talks about in that great book is you have to create a box for yourself, then bust out of that box and realize the box never existed in the first place. Like you have to go through all those steps, which I find is really interesting, because wouldn't it be great if you could just leapfrog all of that over all of that and just be and just are? Now, maybe there's a new generation of people that'll be born into it without all the weird coping mechanisms that we have these days, which there is actually. That was a talk I went to last week with Richard and Zach Bush, which was amazing. But they were talking about this new generation, more or less, actually a new kind of species of human that thinks from the solar plexus rather than the mind, that's going to start in 2027. If we want to get real weird with it.
That's the human design prophecy too, right?
Yeah.
This 2027 event where we're going to become, going from, our minds into our more feeling-based states.
Yes.
And it seems like that's what's happening with this emotional awareness. Like that's the tools to navigate this unknown shift with all the technological advancements and evolution and introduction of AI and all the societal and world climate issues that you were speaking to earlier. There's so much shift and flux that's happening that it's creating. So how do I navigate this going into the unknown? Anything can happen. The potentialities are literally infinite. It could be total catastrophic destruction, or it could be this collective awakening, and it can be anything in between. And so it really comes down to developing the tools to find safety in the unknown and trusting the feeling and this guidance that, the intellect and the mind try to make sense of. But like what I shared earlier, that the mind wants to know and wants to be certain. And the feeling is this guiding post of trust and faith, which is what a lot of the, spiritual kind of philosophies point to.
Right. Because one of the things that came up for me as you were telling your story about having it all and then giving it all away, it also evoked another human question in me, which is, do you have to go through all of that? Do you have to get it all to give it all away? And if you don't get it all, is there something in the back of your mind that wonders, maybe if I just had a little bit more, Because I didn't get to a level of success that you'd write home about, but I had a beautiful home in Temecula, and I had a great job, and I had cars, right? Like that was enough for me, but I did have to get to the point of like, I kind of threw it all away. I gave it all away, and I started from nothing again. But then I think about people that haven't gotten to that point, right? Again, like not something incredible to strive for, but just haven't gotten to that point. And I think my own experience, I wouldn't have been able to wake up in the way that I was if I didn't achieve that certain amount of something that had me looking around being like, okay, so this isn't doing it. What else will? So the reason why I bring up this gene key and actually that 55th of this mutation that's happening, and it sounds really crazy and it sounds like, oh, we're going to be birthing aliens in 2027. But Zach Bush had a really great, that's his name, right?
Yeah.
I always think I said the wrong name. He had this great way of grounding it in the science that we know now. And so I will not be able to explain. So you guys can go to Blue of Earth's podcast. I think it's going to be on there fairly soon. But basically, like, this archetype is already within us. It's already gestating within us. And maybe we still actively think from the mind and make a lot of our decisions based on that. But like you were saying, we're getting to the point where our minds can logic us into an infinite number of directions. And actually, there are machines out there that can possibly think better than you can. But the thing that we can't, that they won't be able to outdo, is out feel or out heart or out intuition. And so, yeah, we need training on that also, because we're so deficient in listening to our gut rather than our brains. Because if we think about the left brain, right brain analogy of that, the right brain, well, the left brain, which is physically, like, we've studied the brain, the left side of the brain is like bulbous because it's worked out, like, you know, we're working out just the right side of our arm or something. We like to know what's graspable. We like to know what's knowable. We like to like concrete things. We like things that make sense. And what makes sense? Things that we take in from our five senses. Well, another thing from the gene keys, like the five senses, or actually this is ancient Chinese, I guess, parable or something. But the five senses are also known as the five thieves. It robs you of your experience of being connected to everything because it shows you how separate you are by different smells, different touches, different sights. But if we can tune into the other senses, our claircognizance, the clairaudience, like the things that you feel that might not be real, but you're like, oh, this is real and I have to pay attention to it. We can build those up more, then we can be a part of this new species, more or less, lack of a better word, this new era of human that isn't just doing what they should do, should be in this relationship for life. Maybe not. Should achieve all the things that your parents told you made you lovable. Maybe you don't. Maybe you give it all away. Maybe you do get divorced. Maybe you do a lot of things you're not supposed to do, because we never know what side of history we're on, right? Being somebody's bad day today might be the greatest thing that you could ever leave for your family moving forward.
That's powerful. What is a moment in your life, talking about the moment that we go through from, you know, taking responsibility of this is happening to me to this is happening for me? Was there any acute experience you went through that shifted your perspective to kind of propel you on this journey?
Oh my God, so many come up.
Right? Like, usually, sometimes it's a lot of little ones that lead to this stuff. I mean, that's why I love talking to athletes, because it's very clear that is a moment. There's obviously multiple moments, but for me, like, one of the biggest moments I had during my career that really shifted my perspective, but the acute letting go of everything changed in a very visceral way my perception of reality. That was really challenging, but it was a gift that led to this deeper expansion through the contraction. So maybe choose one that was really potent.
So my rebirth experience, like the biggest one, the first one's always the biggest one, right? Was this experience of understanding, like, why I was such a bad person. I'm just going to say it in the simplest way. I felt like a bad person, and I should have. I was 28, and up until that point, I had had a boyfriend in my life, multiple ones, different ones, but like since I was 13 years old.
Like, always in relationship?
Yeah, I was like back to back, like couldn't be alone, didn't really even know that I needed to be. Like, it was just, oh, I like you, I'm going to be with you. I don't like you anymore, I'm going to be with you, you know, that kind of thing. And really sleepwalking through my relational experience. And the last two actually were fairly prominent. Like, I was engaged twice to two different people. And throughout these relationships, I wasn't faithful to one person, not one. And these relationships went on long enough to where, like, it wasn't a misunderstanding, right? Like, I'm a cheater now. I am a cheater. And so I had this justification for it. First of all, I didn't know why I did it. I had no awareness around why I did this thing. I knew that I shouldn't. And I knew that I felt like crap on the other side of it. And I knew that absolutely was not fulfilling. But I just like, I didn't know. And I didn't talk to anybody about it because I was so ashamed. It's like this gross, nasty thing, especially if you're a woman, like promiscuous, like you don't want that,
But it wasn't like, oh, this relationship's not fulfilling me anymore and we're kind of being disconnected, so I'm going to find that fulfillment somewhere else. It was more of a compulsion that you needed to.
Both probably. Like, yeah, okay, so I'll give you an example. In one of these relationships where I was actually engaged to the gentleman, he was like addicted to video games, and so I didn't realize that I was being neglected, that I was like kept trying to activate some kind of spark from happening, but I was just not being paid attention to. My lack of good communication skills at the time played into it. I didn't tell him what I needed, I'm sure. I just like passively tried to make things happen. My lack of self-awareness was also there. I didn't realize how lonely I really was. My people-pleasing thing, like I didn't want to break up with him because that would hurt him too much. And him being mad at me hurt me more than I cared about him being upset. So there were a lot of things that happened. And also, yeah, I have like this lust thing about me. Like I love sexual energy. It's also something that I need to accept and not push away, because I did try to push away. Like, I don't like that stuff. I'm a good girl, da da da. And it would just build up and build up. And all of a sudden I'm like, when I least expected, just drink a little bit too much. And all of a sudden I'm like off. And the next morning I'm like, wow, that just happened again. I suck. So I was going to be married in 2 weeks. So this was 2016. And destination wedding, we're going to Hawaii. It's a small wedding, so we're in a ton of people going, but whatever, that was happening. And I was, this guy was like, he's a really good person, but we were not meant to be together. In fact, after it ended, a lot of my family and friends were like, well, thank God you got out of that. They liked him too, but we were just weird together. We were just not meant to be. We're more like roommates.
It's like a collective sigh of relief.
Yeah. And so about 2 weeks before, I go down to San Diego with my good friend Ashley Mays. And we had drank the night before because her husband was out of town. So we had like a girls' day, And the next morning we were so hungover and we went out for brunch. It's a beautiful rooftop. And I see this table of guys sitting. There's like lots of tables, but we're so shameless and kind of hungover, so not thinking straight. We go sit right next to them on this foretop looking at them. We're on the same side of the table, just like, eh. And this table has my partner, Jeff, now sitting at it, right? Which I didn't know him at the time. And it's a bunch of Canadian Special Forces guys. They couldn't tell us what they did for a living, but I just had this energy that they're like, these are like the coolest guys I've ever seen.
Those Special Forces guys, it's almost like athletes too. It's like they know themselves.
Yeah.
Like the training that they've done and the ability for them to know situational awareness and how to care for themselves. It's almost like they radiate this. If something bad happens, like these guys would not be phased, and they can radiate that. When you sense that, it's very attractive.
Very attractive. And it wasn't like they were like big or anything. Like real Special Forces guys, they're very unassuming. You don't know who they are. Because they're picked like that. You don't want to see some guy come and be like, that guy is in hiding, but he's giant and all this stuff. But yeah, they had this sense of safety. Like I felt like I could have hip kicked anybody in there and be like, my boyfriend will beat you up. Like that kind of vibe. So anyway, we get to chatting and I remember looking at him and he's very quiet. And I was like, why can't I marry somebody like this? Like I just had these thoughts. I was thinking, well, maybe if I just get married, I'll be like different on the other side. I'll be like really in love. I'll stop this whole cheating thing. And I will be a good wife. Like this is my day, once I get married. But I remember having that thought of, why can't I marry somebody like this? This is actually the person I've been trying to change my ex into, if I'm honest with myself. And then I had the thought, well, maybe I can. Maybe I can just marry somebody like this. Why am I like going through life and just doing a bunch of stuff that I don't want to be doing? Obviously, creating lots of destruction in my wake that sure might be secretive, but nevertheless hurtful at some point when this comes out. And so still the inability to be able to like make good adult decisions. I still got married. But I kept in contact with Jeff. And this is so getting back to like, how did this all change for me? My intuition, like how did that really come online? Everything about Jeff was a no-go, like intellectually. He was in the SF, so he couldn't tell me what he did for a living. I knew he was in the military, but there was something weird about it. He had a secret cell phone that I couldn't have the number for, that I wasn't even supposed to know he had. And then he had like the cell phone I could call. So if that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. I wasn't thinking special forces. I was just thinking like con man, maybe.
Was that energy kind of intoxicating and like?
Well, I was hoping not, because this is about to be the worst decision I ever made if I went down that route. Also, I was sharing this with you earlier, like he kind of had like serial killer vibes to me. He's like very quiet, very intense. That like, I need you to like me kind of vibe, not from him, but like whenever people meet him, they're like, I think he hates me, but I need him to like me. Like, I don't know why a lot of people say that.
Interesting.
So everything about this man, with no social media, like friends that also can't tell me what they do for a living. I'm like, oh my God, either these are all like street magicians and like they have some alliance, or I don't know. But my intuition, this was the first time my whole life where I noticed that there are two different things here. I'm so late to the game, right? 28. Like, oh, intuition and your mental mind and your ego are two different things. I had no idea. And now I have the choice. Who am I going to listen to? Okay, well, I've been only using my mind for a lot of my life. And I'm not dead, so that's good. And that's, I think, what my ego tells me often is, well, it's not that bad. So you can listen to me, not great, but you know, you're alive and everyone thinks you're doing fine. So maybe that's enough. And then I have my intuition, this like wild card that kind of came out of nowhere, this like naked screaming girl that has been locked up in in a jungle for a while. It's like, I have so much to say. Do you want to try me out for once? So I was like, yeah, I want to go that route. But still got married. But 8 days later, after everybody went home from the destination wedding, so I could deal with this in private and like just figure myself out a bit. I had the hard conversation. I got out of that relationship with not very much grace. Like I told him everything, you know, and which I can imagine was devastating for him.
Yeah. So did you connect with Jeff the 2 weeks prior? Or were you guys connected and you guys want to stay in touch? Did you communicate with him that you were about to get married?
Oh yeah. He knew everything. And to him, like, it's funny when we talk about it today, he's like, I don't know why I didn't think you were insane.
Yeah.
Like that seems like the most red flags ever. And from him, the most red flags ever. But we just knew that
there was something deeper that was illogical. Yeah. And I mean, was this one of the first relationships where you meet a guy and you kind of spew all the truth out that you normally wouldn't share? And was there something that connected you and that guy feels safe to like share that I'm about to get married and all this stuff? Sure when you were going and meeting these other guys in a promiscuous way, you weren't saying I'm in a relationship.
No, there was none of that with the other, experiences that I had, because I chose them. Now in hindsight, I can see all this. I was completely sleepwalking through all of that, but now I can see I chose them because there was no way I would get in a relationship with them. Either they were in a relationship with somebody else, or they were like somebody I would not want to be in a relationship, like just not a nice person. But I always built in this like safety of like, I'm never going to see this person again.
So it justified the act.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, this is just for me. I just need to get this out and I'll go back to being a good person. So yeah, but with Jeff, I was like, this is totally different. But actually, notably on New Year's Eve that year, I had my first plant medicine journey, and that woke me up to all of the things I was tolerating in my life that were absolutely ridiculous. Things that that actively co-created, not things that they were put on me, but it was a slow kind of like awareness and a level of softenings to all the bull crap in my life that like, I actually hate this. And I had no idea. Oh my God, what do I do?
How far, what was the plant medicine and how far before this meeting of Jeff did that take place?
It was 4 months before. New Year's Eve is when I had my first plant medicine ceremony with San Pedro.
Mm-hmm.
It was very subtle, super, super subtle. It felt like a deep meditation. But the moment that I dropped in, or that felt like dropping into this very gentle kind of experience, was laying under what I think was a pepper tree and seeing all these peppercorns on the floor and not really feeling like anything was happening, but it was like a series of insights, like, oh, this, oh, that. And I just went to Home Goods the day before and bought this really expensive pepper grinder for my house that was too big for me, with all the Home Goods pillows and like the Home Goods.
She loves Home Goods.
Oh my God. I've never stepped in a Home Goods since, by the way.
That's funny.
But I was like, oh, wow, all this pepper is just on the floor here. And I just started laughing, like, to say it doesn't sound very powerful, but I just realized everything I need is already here.
That is super powerful.
And I was like, whoa, I need nature.
So
Yeah.
safe to say that that was kind of the initial connection to this other part of yourself that was given space, because, I love Wachuma San Pedro, this cactus. It's really, really subtle and gentle and beautiful, and it creates safety for that
Yeah.
stuff to come up and to listen and to be present to that other aspect of the knowing, the emotional connection. And so then you had that experience, and then that kind of led to this experience connecting with this man. So you have this new awareness now, communicate it. You decide still, I'm too scared to break off this wedding because there's so many people involved and we've been planning it for so long. So I'm going to go through it. How challenging was it to hold that knowing that you're not going to be married to this person, but you have to go through the marriage ceremony?
Dude, it was really weird. It's still to this day, thinking about it gives me the heebie-jeebies because it was so dishonest. Everything was so dishonest. I disassociated so hard. I barely remember anything of it. I remember pictures that a few people had taken. I remember my mom crying constantly because my mom's very intuitive and she knew that I didn't want to be there. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew something was wrong. And yeah, I was like completely checked out. I was probably a zombie. Yeah, I don't.
That must have been
remember
intense for everybody. Probably could have felt it on some level.
Totally. It was the most effed up wedding ever.
Yeah. That is so fuck, that is intense. I can only imagine. You went through it because you didn't want to let anybody down, I'm assuming.
Yeah, which that would have been so much better if I just did that before. I mean, now I know that, but before I thought I was being kind by everybody enjoy their vacation. What I didn't understand was frequency. What I didn't understand is how powerful a thought form, how powerful truth actually is. Everybody was miserable. It's not like I was walking around being a jerk or like sad or crying, but they were like, something is not right here. And like, it wasn't.
So 8 days later, you say, I need to sit down with you and tell you something. How does that conversation go?
Also disassociated during that part. I don't exactly remember what it was, but we had a bit of a honeymoon in Hawaii, and then we came home. And as soon as we got home, it was like I needed to be home to do it. I don't know why. I just like needed to be close to my family, or just like something in case. There was no danger of him being physically abusive at all, but I just needed to be somewhere where I knew where I was. Again, that safety. And there wasn't actually a lot of negotiation. Now, I don't know what was actually happening internally because I haven't talked to him since. I did try to reach out. No, that's not accurate. I tried to reach out to another ex of mine that I really left on a bad note as well. And I got a go F yourself response. And that to me was like, as I go through this process of forgiving myself for being like doing some stuff that was wrong, just straight up wrong, and feeling ashamed of that. And rightfully so. Like sometimes shame and guilt have their place. But to then move past that and to be able to share it in the case that maybe somebody listening can resonate with that, and that there's another side of it, and that's okay. There's some tools that you're going to have to learn and some stuff that you have to do. But to get to this point where I can share it without feeling like I want to run out of this room, part of that was like, do I reach out to these people and make amends? And my hesitation with that after getting that one response when I attempted to go through this process of reaching out to people and apologizing was like, where are they at? Am I reopening wounds that they don't want reopened? Is this another selfish act of mine so that I feel better about myself because I know that they're not mad at me anymore? Or I know that they've like, are you married? Like, tell me about yourself so I don't feel bad. So that part, I've kind of like decided at least now that I don't want to reopen things for people that, like, I'm not sure what my intention is. I want the best for them. If I'm totally honest with you, like, yeah,
there's subtleties to that, and it's really powerful. And I'd love for you to speak more to the journey of forgiveness and dealing with some of this, because I'm sure, forgiveness, like you said, the subtleties of it's forgiving myself, and then what is the intention of reaching out? And forgiveness is it's a solo journey in a lot of ways. It's an energy and release of the shame that you're carrying around, these actions that you took that is not necessarily in alignment with your highest intention. And I think the work you do now is some of the shadow and the integrating these parts of ourselves that we push down, and then because we don't honor them, communicate with them, integrate them, they come out in these unhealthy dynamics and these patterns, and they really teach us a lot. And having to go, part of the journey of healing is taking radical responsibility and ownership for all of the actions that you did that maybe aren't in alignment with your highest potential. So talk a little bit about that forgiveness, because forgiveness is a really, really intense journey, but it's really a journey that we're all on.
Yeah. Well, the journey of forgiveness for myself has been really long, and I'm still going through it. There's different levels to it. The first one was even understanding what shadow work was. So I think I am the poster child of shadow work, because on the outside, it was also secretive. It was secret from myself, other than I am aware that I'm going out to do these things, and I know that that's bad. It was a level of disassociation, a level of compartmentalization that I was practically unaware of. And at some points I would just drink and kind of black out, and it would just happen and be like, well, was that even me? How am I two separate different people? And come to find I'm lots of different kinds of people. But at that time I was like, there's the good me and there's the bad me. So even acknowledging that there are different parts of myself to myself was step one. Because that might be acknowledging that I'm not a good person. And if you're anything like me, that mattered a lot to me, to know that I am inherently good. So that was hard. Then when I was in this new relationship with somebody that I was like, I cannot F this up. This is the person I've been waiting for my whole life. And I have an opportunity to show up in this in a way that I've never shown up before for him, but mostly for myself. Because if I did the things that I continued doing, he would never know, right? But I have to do this right. So the next step in this forgiveness process, which I don't think I'd forgiven myself at all at that point, was taking all of the courses and reading all of the books, because I clearly had none of the tools to help me understand what being in a healthy relationship was. I had the facade of knowing what a healthy relationship was. It was domestic. I can cook. I can make you laugh. I can make you feel good about yourself. But what does real intimacy look like? And do I create enough space for myself to have actual emotions in this relationship? Because if I show you any of my cracks, does that mean you think I'm broken and hence am I a bad person, So there's a lot of that extreme honesty in our relationship showing up. And I talk a lot about my relationship now in this conversation around self-forgiveness, which is interesting because one of the things that we'll hear often is that you need to love yourself before you can fully love somebody else. And to an extent, I agree with that, but we are, it's in relationship that we're broken, in relationship to other people, the thing that we were talking about earlier, this trust that is, other people are always involved in that, your dad picks you up late, your mom tells you she loves you, but whatever, that invalidates that she loves you. So it's in relationship that we lose pieces of ourselves. And I think that in relationship, that's how I was able to gain those parts back, because just on my own, I was just floating around, So being lucky enough to be in this relationship and starting it off, I think, which was also helpful with extreme honesty, here's all of my stuff. You still into it? And for him to be like, yeah, kinda, let's talk about
maybe.
it. Yeah. But I think that he was like, who is this person? This honest, uninhibited, brave, wild thing that's come into my life. And it's I don't know, she's new to me too. And he was able to create space for me to explore these edges and look into these dark spaces that had never been looked in before, and so many cobwebs and spiders and creepy things in there. And some things that I thought were going to be way more creepy and scary, that when I pulled them out, I was like, that's actually something awesome. This version of myself. And I named her my demon slut. I kind of personified her and gave her a face and all of this, so I can have an actual relationship with her and add some distance between the I, which doesn't really exist, but my conscious observation of myself and this other version of myself that kept showing up in ways that were destructive. It's who are you? And now with more tools, what I was doing was active imagination, which have you talked about that on the show before?
I don't think specifically. If you want to share a little bit about it.
Yeah. So active imagination is something that the Jungians will use in dream work, or I would say primarily dream work is a great place where they'll use it, where a character comes to you, and a character can be this tree, it can be the room, it can be you. but you isolate that character and you have a dialogue with it. And you observe like, what is the feeling sense around being with, in my case, my demon slut? Like, am I scared? Am I curious? Am I like intrigued? What is she wearing? And it's all in my imagination, but the imagination holds so much soul and so many answers that we've poo-pooed over the years for whatever reason. And as I began to not ask these questions of like, why are you doing this to me? Which is what I wanted to ask. Like, why are you here? Go away. And why are you doing this to me? Like, what are you trying to teach me? Instead, this is a lot of trial and error. Now I know how to do it. But like back then, I didn't know what I was doing. But now it'd be like, where did you come from? What are you doing here? What do you like to do? Like, who are you? Just getting more interested in that I versus this I that's trying to problem solve. And that gave me so much information around the other gifts that this shadow element of myself had that were being repressed because I didn't want to acknowledge this version of myself. So yeah, she's a lustful, like brave version of myself. And the positives of that, she's adventurous and she's outgoing and she's funny and she like really has some edges that are out there that are inspiring if we go there together intentionally, and ceremonially rather than trying to shove her away and her just busting out like a shaken up soda can. So that for me was like the biggest turning point. And when I shared that with my partner, I was like, this is an aspect of myself that is me. This is a shadow element. And the Jungians talk about this. We can talk about transmuting your shadows into a gift state, but you never get rid of them. And why would we? Because those darker aspects of being human are so interesting. It's the thing that makes us want to watch movies, and it's really the thing that makes us want to live life, are those valleys that you just shoot yourself out of eventually, hopefully. So I was like, this is a part of me, and I'm going to need some help because I notice like it'll be out of balance if I need these things from you, and it might seem selfish. And to me, everything felt selfish at the time because I wasn't used to sharing what I wanted, these boundaries, right? I thought the way that I was lovable was by being likable and making things easy on you. So whatever I did that you didn't know about was fine because that's not your problem. But now I'm in this new realm of I need to do everything differently. So I just started doing everything differently. But I really got into shadow work in particular because I realized how impactful that was. And I just wondered how many more people like me are walking around hiding things and are ashamed of parts of themselves that are actually really freaking amazing if they can be expressed and acknowledged in a different way.
Thanks for sharing that. It's really powerful. I love the parts language because it takes off the pressure of this is who I am and saying these different aspects of who I am. And a lot of times there's experiences in our lives that maybe that part of yourself, the reason it got disconnected from the identity of who you are and got put in the shadow is because maybe when you were younger, there was that vivacious, like kind of more promiscuous energy that presented itself at a younger age that came out and then was probably shamed or rejected by, whether it's a parent, a peer, or something happens, like, oh, that is not acceptable. And so that part of you still exists, that energy. And then you start saying, okay, I can't let you out. And then you start putting it in the shadow and you really beautiful. Like I love this language and the power of the psyche and the healing capacity to give it a name, give it a persona, and then welcome it into it, give it a seat at the table of your consciousness of who you are. And I love active imagination and shamanic journey work and using the imagination and the psyche to communicate with these different aspects of self. And, it's really powerful to hey, you have a seat at the table and listening and communicating. And the psyche is so powerful. It will actually give you answers. It feels like it's something outside of yourself and you're like communicating with. It's really, really powerful.
So spooky. Like it is so spooky. If you ever have a recurring dream, speaking to most of you listening, because I feel like you know this, but like if you ever have a recurring dream, do some active imagination and they never come back. Like you resolve the thing that your psyche's been trying to tell you and it's like, great, we can move on, And
that's why curiosity is so powerful. Like if you have a nightmare and it's recurring and it's like scary and you're like, oh, this thing keeps happening and this entity keeps coming and it's really dark and I'm like, and in my dream, I can't look away. It's like, approach it with curiosity. Say, why are you here? What do you have to share with me? What do you have to teach me? Is there something that you want to communicate? And a lot of times it will that intention of curiosity will decrease and alleviate the fear frequency, and it will either subside or communicate with you what it's actually trying to communicate. And the psyche just is constantly trying to get us back to wholeness and heal us and integrate itself into a more cohesive self-structure, which is what Jungian psychology is all about.
I love this conversation about forgiveness because this isn't usually how they go, right? There are these different personalities, more or less, that live within us that feel ashamed and who are you even forgiving? Sometimes I get a little bit down my own rabbit hole, but how do I forgive myself? That's kind of an insane sentence to think about. How do I forgive myself? Are there two people that we're talking to, you know? There's two subjects, or I don't know English very well either, clearly. But there's two people that we're talking about in that sentence. And that's very accurate, actually, because there is a part of you that you need to forgive. And so what is their experience of you? Can you forgive your demon slut? Can you forgive the whatever part of yourself? And in order to do that, I think you have to really believe that they're real. First, acknowledge that I even exist. Otherwise, this whole rigmarole is for nothing. But then also to share that with somebody, and like we're doing right now, to share that with somebody that you trust, like how I did with Jeff, was really great, because then I could see, not only am I trying to forgive this other part of myself, and that other part of myself is trying to forgive me back for being so mean to it. There's another person that's not involved at all, and he's forgiving me. And I was like, okay, that's great. I need to collect this data, because I've never separated myself from this shame. It's always been who I am. And even writing it down, and then at the grandest scale, saying it on my podcast, saying it here, which me 10 years ago, I'd been like, there's absolutely no way I can share this with you. What will people think about me? And they can still think I'm gross, which, that was some bad stuff. And also the act of what they call narrative therapy, sharing your story adds such great light to the shadow, right? Once it's out in the light, it's not as scary.
Yeah, because to receive judgment from others is because you're still judging yourself. And if you have gotten to a place of forgiveness and healing and acceptance of that part of yourself, you can share it. If somebody's judging you, you can see that that's their own judgment of probably themselves or their own shadow projection onto you, and you don't have to take it on.
Yeah.
Which is really powerful. And I think another point I want to make too that's really powerful about this shadow work, and you've explained it so eloquently through your own story, which I really appreciate, because a lot of people talk about shadow work and it's viewed on the most basic level as evil and the shadow and its darkness. There's a lot of good aspects of ourselves that are in our shadow too. I've had and Jung calls it the golden shadow. And with me, I've had a lot of my power, my strength, my light, my ability, my heart, my big heart to shine and love was for a long time in my life in my shadow, because that part of me was not honored. It was rejected in whatever way experienced when I was younger. And that was with my religious upbringing and my parents. It's just the shame and the fear from the religious beliefs. This light inside of me, I felt like shame was, I couldn't connect with God. So I put that part of me in the shadow and didn't let it out. So the shadow does consist of good, light, positive aspects of ourselves that we're maybe not honoring as well. And I think that with some of this kind of spiritual language that people have of, positive thinking, and we're all light and like attracts like. And so it's all about chasing these higher frequencies or this good. And they continue to not honor the shadow. And one of my favorite Jungian quotes is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate. And when we start recognizing the unconscious patterns in our life, like for you, how come every time I'm in a relationship, I go get drunk and I go sleep with somebody else, and you start recognizing this thing keeps showing up, and you can either say, oh, it's because of my relationship, and kind of putting that responsibility outside yourself. Like, my boyfriend's playing video games, I can't connect with them, I'm righteous in doing this. But that pattern is going to continue to show up in your life unconsciously until you decide to look at it and communicate with that shadow. Mm-hmm. And so to actually access, like Jung talks about, in order for the trees and the branches to grow up to heaven, the higher that you want that to go, the deeper the roots have to go into hell. And that hell is the shadow, and being able to integrate that. And so if you're on this spiritual path, it's not about bypassing the darkness. It's about understanding that the darkness is a very real aspect of you. It's an energy that lives in the archetypal dimensions of all of us in the collective unconscious. And until you start recognizing and integrating those aspects of yourself that you have shame around, fear around, and you don't want to connect with because they're filthy, they're gross, and they're shameful, and I don't want people to know that that's a part of me. Every single one of us has a shadow, and being able to love that shadow, integrate it, and talk about it, and give it a seat at the table, it's no longer going to control you, but you can actually access the gifts that it has for you, which is really beautiful. And I really appreciate you sharing your story so vulnerably and getting to this place. It's really, really powerful, and I know it's going to impact a lot of people.
Thank you for saying that, and that's so well said. The love and light thing is tricky because where I personally grapple with it is your frequency in most cases is a choice. We do know that. You can choose to, I don't know how to put it into words, but when you do that shift, you're like, actually everything's fine. Like just becoming like coming back to yourself.
I feel like gratitude's a really great access point to that. It's like, even if I'm going through a real shitty day, it's like, can I find gratitude for just being alive and just taking a breath? Or like, my kid, like, okay, I'm grateful for that. And that can really shift you out of a dark state and shift your frequency in a really powerful way.
Right. Now, why don't we do that all the time? Right? Because that means like if a little good is good, more must be better. But I think that the subtlety there is that we can only experience a certain level of, let's say, gratitude if we have something else pulling the strings, like you were talking about. And so when we do things like shadow work and we go into our dark night proactively, sometimes not so on purpose, sometimes you just end up there. Often we can find those pieces of ourselves that we lost in those places. And so you travail the path into the underworld, into this frequency that is like, the secret wouldn't like that, like the manifestation people wouldn't like you being in there for too long. But it's a place that we have to go to bring that elixir back up so that the high vibes that you're bringing into the majority of your life, hopefully after, and it's a series of journeys, right? You don't just go once, but that it's that much more lit, that much more impactful.
And cleaner too. Like if there's a frequency of feeling like actual safety. And if somebody's, there's a difference in the frequency of someone saying, yeah, like I'm just high vibe. I don't like to, like I had this guy I was talking to on a discovery call for the community, and it was just really focused on positivity. There's just a lot of negativity out there. And when I'm around negativity, it's like, I just want to go be around positive people. And, the question with that, there's a lot of power in positive thinking. And it's definitely an aspect of the journey. But then you got to ask the question of, why is all this negativity being attracted to me that I want to go towards positivity? I don't experience a lot of negativity in my life. I'm not like, and when I see negative people, I can hold space, and actually, because I'm so grounded and clean in my frequency, I can alchemize their frequency and their fear and their destructive, maybe anger at me because something happened. Maybe it's like road rage. It's like, okay, I can feel their energy coming at me. And like, when I look at the ancient understanding of alchemy, of turning lead into gold on an energetic level, I believe real alchemy is being able to turn lower, denser fear frequencies into love and light in real time.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're angry at me, how can I alchemize that and then love you in your space and literally see them shift? And then I've had moments where people like, oh, I'm sorry. Like they recognize and wake up to the fact that they're in this state of real anger, and it's not at me. It's because something was triggered within them and they're projecting it onto me. But if I haven't done that shadow work, it's going to trigger something within me. And I can say, oh, I'm like wanting to chase positivity. This person's angry. And then that still creates this us versus them, which is a big part of the systemic issues that we're facing. Is like, even if there's this big spiritual community over here, it's like, let's just ascend together and do this thing. But they're all still like angry and dense and fearful. It's like, are you like, the real journey is, how do we love and bring that frequency of love? And the only way to do that is to integrate this darkness within us. Oh yeah.
Triggers are a fantastic tool. Like, think about the never-ending opportunities to be triggered, like it's everywhere, right? If you are open to opening up yourself to that. So I really, really like this conversation that you had with the guy on the discovery call around, oh yeah, like kind of avoiding things that trigger him because he likes to feel good. Well, sometimes we talk about getting out of your comfort zone and that being an ice bath. But sometimes it's talking to somebody that triggers you, because what a great lesson in what matters to you, or the thing that is bringing up in you your own insecurities or whatever. Like that is, for me, there's a couple of things with shadow work and self-development and personal growth that are like game changers once you start to habitually do. And that's one of them. Anytime I get mad or upset, what is this trigger trying to teach me? That was a huge game changer. And there's also the other one that you had mentioned there. So like 2 in 1 is seeing that person as divine, as perfection. And I literally envision them having angel wings. And once I can be like, this person is divine. They just have some memory problems. I got that from my friend Danielle Raphael. The divine being with memory problems, like then it's so weird how people change. I'm not like, I'm imagining you with angel wings right now and you're perfect. I just think it and I really believe it. And all of a sudden it's like something weird happens, and they're like not so upset and their mood changes and they start laughing. It's so cool.
It's so cool. Like alchemy in real life. And I love that what she said, like they just have a memory problem, because we've all forgotten and we've all become more disconnected from nature, which is a disconnection from self, which is a disconnect from God or this higher energy that really we're all one within this field of frequency. How can we be separate? How can anything be outside of the creation of itself? And to realize that we're all just forgetting on different levels, and to say, okay, I'm going to remember that you're divine, I'm divine, and there's this block or resistance to this frequency. How can I see through that, see past that, and see your heart, and see that maybe you've just gone through a pretty traumatic life, and that's full circle into what we're talking about of like, we're all going through something, we're all on this journey together, and it's not just the individual trauma that we're working through. That's a very real part of the experience, but there's such a collective, ancestral, inherited trauma of this society that we're born into, and we didn't really have a choice. But it is our responsibility to start shifting this narrative on a collective scale, and I see that happening every single day, and it's what a time to be alive, to be here.
I know, it's so interesting, to like be aware that we are part of this vast ordering system, and sure, we have free will, and maybe there's destiny and there's fate. I have no idea what's right at this point. I'm not even close to being able to understand that. But it's funny, like people that really trigger me, like Jeff Bezos, for example, I can look at him and be like, what a douche. But who am I to say that this isn't the path that his soul chose, that like he is undoing so much karma in his own ways, And so sometimes I have to check myself and realize, again, like the thing we were talking about before, when people are like glorify people and they're put on a pedestal, and it's hard to see their trauma. It's hard to see their pain because, oh, he could save all of Africa with just a day's paycheck, but he doesn't. Why? Well, dude must be going through a lot. He must be going through so much that I can't even comprehend. And yeah.
One thing I like to think about that with too, because it's easy to get in a state of despair when you look out in the world and where we're at and the potentialities of destruction and, global devastation and, people like Jeff Bezos. Imagine, I like to think about this. Imagine like every single person, like me and you just spoke about aspects of our awakening process. Imagine when people in that type of position go through a similar awakening process. And a lot of times it's through like a mundane experience or through some type of challenging experience, whatever it is, but everybody has the potential of waking up to a higher level of understanding and being. And people in positions like that, imagine the change and the shifts that can happen in an instant when more and more people in those positions begin to have these experiences of expanded levels of consciousness, understanding that we're all one, and they start letting go of this deep sense of lack that they're feeling through all of these things that they're creating on such a mass scale. It's the same frequency that we're all feeling, like we talked about. Like, why did I feel the need and desire to achieve greatness in football? There was a foundational piece that I was lacking something, and it was really connected to my father wound, where I wanted to be received, loved, accepted by my dad. And so I went on this thing so that I could receive that, and still it didn't fulfill that desire. And so you get to a point, maybe it's Jeff Bezos, maybe it's some other political leader or world leader, and they get together and they start, waking up to these deeper realities. And it's just the ability for humanity to shift on a dime. I mean, you look at the pandemic, like however you view that, it was fascinating how the globe changed and we all adjusted as humanity so quickly. And so I'm very hopeful and inspired by our potentials and ability to collaborate and to create. Like you look at globalization, like the systems and processes and cooperation, it might be from a frequency of greed, fear, and lack, but the ability for us to create a global society is super impressive and mind-blowing. And if we start infusing it with these higher frequencies of gratitude, love, and joy by integrating those shadows, not bypassing them, what we can actually create as a one human organism, like, woof, like to think about that and focus on that and bringing that into the potentialities that we want to create, it's just really, really exciting.
Oh, it's so well said. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I wonder, do you think Jeff Bezos has ever done ayahuasca?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of tech people are doing it out of this idea of performance enhancing, and like I know psychedelics and microdosing is a big thing, but there's something like different between, mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, and ketamine. When you work with these plants in a ceremonial, like indigenous way, there's almost the other psychedelics I mentioned, it's like they allow you to work with your own psyche, but these plants have a consciousness and they become teachers and they integrate. Like I can tap into ayahuasca and have this relationship with ayahuasca. She continues to teach me. And it's like those medicines are just, there's something different about them.
Wow. I never thought about that. You're right. Yeah, there's something about ketamine that I'm not resonating with. I've never done it before, so I can't really say, and I don't know too much about it, but something intuitively about that.
What's hard with someone that's experienced like dissociation, like a lot of times people use it to dissociate from the attachment so they can kind of get a bird's eye view of their stories. But if you are somebody that experiences dissociation, it actually is more of like a deeper disconnection and escape. Obviously, if you do it in like more of a medical like setting where you're kind of guided through it, I'm sure they have like the tools to navigate you, but I've never experienced it in that way.
That makes sense. All right. Yeah, these are not toys.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. They're probably, no, I can't speak to the ones that come from labs. I don't have any experience with those other than recreationally back in the day. But with Iboga, combo to an extent, it's not a psychoactive, but it'll put you in an altered state. And ayahuasca and bufo. I don't know if I said all that. So those 4 medicines, I apprenticed with a medicine woman last year for about 6 months or so. And they're all like friends. They're all friends that come from different parts of the universe, but they all play nice together. It's really interesting. And something that I noticed in particular is that people leave, and this is so interesting. Like I never thought of this before. Yeah, you can leave a psilocybin experience, or rather like let's say LSD, or even microdosing mushrooms, and it'll negotiate with you. What are your goals? And like let's play with that. But with certain things like Iboga or ayahuasca or bufo, they have their own agenda. And it's like to wipe away all the crap that we've been conditioned to think matters and to remind us that life is school, love is a lesson, and like, what are you going to do about that now that you know? And that's why I feel like I don't think Jeff Bezos has done ayahuasca, because I feel like if he did do it, we'd know about it.
Yeah. Well, let's put that intention out there. Well said. Oh my goodness. This conversation has covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
I'm really, really grateful. Oh my goodness. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for your story.
Thank you for having me.
Let's share about kind of wrapping it up. Let's share about the documentary. I know you're kind of doing a soft release, looking for some more funds to get the entire thing out so that it can have a bigger impact and put a little bit of a push behind it with a marketing strategy. So where can people find it? How can they support what you're doing, and kind of any bigger visions of how you see it unfolding? And we'll be sure to put all these links in the show notes as well.
Great. So you can watch the trailer and learn more about the film in general at posttraumaticgrowth.film. And for the month of June and some of May of 2023, we're running short screenings every Thursday at various times for the film, the short version of the film. And the reason, like, we could finish the film right now, but we want to raise funds for custom animations, which can be a little bit pricey. And then also an impact campaign where we're going to travel around film festivals, but also sending the film and a few panelists that have relevant stories and experiences to wherever we're sending them, like prisons, like addiction centers, to spread awareness of what's possible on the other side of traumatic experience, especially in communities where they need that awareness the most, and they can do the most good with that information. So that is going to be running, May 16th to the end of June. June is Mental Health Awareness Month, so it felt like a good time to observe the positive sides of, of the hard stuff. And that's a Kickstarter. So you can also find that information from our website. I'll have a link to that as well. And I would say, like, if you are moved by the story, in addition to pledging, what may be even more beneficial is to share the concept, the film, the Kickstarter, whatever resources you find on the site with somebody that may be struggling with depression, because it's not an airy-fairy kind of film. We get real with it, but also the feedback that I've heard so far from a few like therapists that have shared this with their clients is that it can be a game changer. It can be that thing that snaps people out of it, out of feeling broken and hopeless, into being like, oh, maybe this could actually be the source of my superpower that I haven't discovered yet.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. Deeply grateful for you putting your energy and love and intention into sharing this. I was just really feeling when, something as simple as watching a documentary because it's a shift in perspective, and just that little bit of shift and that lens and the inspiration of seeing other people make that change of, oh, this person went through something either similar, maybe worse, and they are finding growth through their experience. How can I do that? I mean, that's really where the conversation starts and the inspiration happens. And so I really appreciate you for taking this on and putting it together. And
thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share all of this with you, letting me geek out on these things that just run around in my brain all day. So it's nice to share them.
I had so much fun. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you personally?
Yeah, on Instagram would be the best place. Jessica Depatie _. That's DEPATIE _.
Amazing. And if you guys enjoy it, check out all that will be in the show notes. Check out the trailer, and then support if you feel called. Share it far and wide. And if you enjoyed this podcast, a great way to support is to leave a 5-star review, follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if, as you were listening to the show, watching the show, and somebody popped into your mind that you thought might benefit or be inspired by our conversation, something as simple as sharing this podcast with them can really make an impact. And it's been really cool to see the impact that this show has. And it's not about, necessarily reaching the masses, but it's about the individuals that, lives are changed from a simple story, and the ripples and the potential that has to really change the world one person at a time. And you can do your role if you feel like inspired to share this. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you. And talk to you next time. Peace.
Bye.